What's good, IB Nation? Welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I'm Vince D'Addario. That guy right over there is Brian Driscoll. And Brian, do you ever laugh so hard you start getting little tears in your eyes?
As a matter of fact, I just did that right before the show started. Yep.
That's what I was just going to say. It's kind of what I got going on right now. Yep. So, it's a great day, everybody. If you were on the show yesterday, early evening, the one that Sean and I did together, you're going to notice a little bit of a difference between myself in those two shows. I feel like a completely different human being. It's amazing what sleep can do for you. And things are starting to get back to normal around here. If you could see the area around where I'm at right now, I'm completely surrounded by what's supposed to be in that room over there, but we're drying out. Things are good. And so I appreciate people reaching out and everything. It was really awesome. So thank you very much. But we're back. It could have been a lot worse. I will say that. It's a good thing my kid hit legs on the day before, because his arms were put into quite the test. So it was good holding that window shut just like for an hour straight. He's like, "Dad, I'm hurting." I'm like, "You're okay. Keep going." But anyway,
so I get no love here. I mean, yesterday you told me I saved the day.
It's true. You did save it. So can I tell the story? Am I allowed to tell the story? Okay.
Go for it.
So Brian and I, the last time we did a show together was on Tuesday. And kind of before the show, we basically decided, you know what? Today's the day we're going to go get the PS5. And I was like, let's do it. Let's go. And so we after the show was over, pretty much immediately, we hop in the car together. We run some errands. We go to GameStop and we get all the necessary paraphernalia. And we're like two kids in a candy store. It felt like I was a teenager again. We just had a great time. It's a good afternoon. So we get home and I'm playing. Kid comes home from football practice. He jumps in. He's playing. We're having a great time. Next thing I know, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, I got to go to bed, dude. He looks me dead in the eye. He's like, "Dad, I'm pulling an all-nighter. You can go to bed." I'm like, "Cool, man. You're 17. I remember those days. Have a great time." And so I go to bed. Half hour later, he comes running up to the bedroom and he's like, "Dad, we got a major problem." I'm like, "What?" Well, long story short, I come down and it's like Niagara Falls Jr. in our basement coming out of the well. And so we go through the whole thing. So as we're doing it, we're talking. He looks at me. He goes, "Dad," he goes, "You're lucky that I was pulling an all-nighter because I heard that water flowing in." And he goes, "Normally we would have all been in bed and we would have woken up to like, inches and inches of water in our entire basement. Everything would have been ruined. It would have been terrible." He goes, "You're lucky I was pulling an all-nighter." And we kind of backtrack. We're like, you know what? It's a good thing we went and got that PS5. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been up that late. And that goes back to Brian saying, "Hey, let's go get that thing today." Like, let's completely random. Let's go. So it all goes back to Brian.
I saved the day. I totally saved the day.
Saved the day. I mean, clearly, he put his cape on while sleeping and was saving the day. Who
favorite part of the story. Vince is telling me the story. Because, y'all, we had water damage, and that led to a lot of the renovations we had to do. So Vince tells me the story. He goes, Dylan's like, "Dad, how much damage can this actually do?" At Vince, as they're bailing water at 3 o'clock in the morning, $100,000. I heard about the whole thing. Keep bailing.
It's like there was no filter. I'm like, $100,000. I've heard the whole story.
Obviously, sharing the price of what our renovation costs. So
nice round
gave
number.
A little bit, but you were close. We were at like 90.
Yeah,
was the price for the whole thing, including all the damage and stuff. And like I said, insurance gave a little bit, but not nearly enough to cover all the damage.
Right.
So that was good stuff. But we're glad you're okay, man. I missed you last night doing the buy sell hold.
I love buy sell hold. That's that's one of my new it's approaching, the mailbag as far as excitement for me. I really enjoy those. I really do.
Yep.
So
you had to run around, run upstairs, run downstairs. You had to get that force, get that drive, like drive blocking, which leads right into today's topic, which is the run game. Not just run game for the offense, not just run game for the defense. But today we're going to talk about how important growth in the run game is for both sides of the ball.
Right.
How well Notre Dame's offense is at running the football this season and all the things that means, and how well the defense is at stopping the run and all the things that entails, is going to go a long way towards determining how good this team is overall. But even more importantly, It's going to determine how well they play in the big games, especially the one on the road, and then how well they play in the postseason. And that's what we're going to dive into today.
100%. And so the first thing we're going to do, and I know this is going to surprise a lot of people, is we're going to talk defense first and how important the run defense is to Notre Dame. You know, not only being an elite defense, because we've had to talk about Notre Dame can be an elite defense if, you know, certain things happen. And we feel pretty good about Notre Dame being an elite defense. But the run game, I would say overall is, and I say weakness, but it's not.
I'll say this, Vince. This is the way to put it. It's the one area where the most growth is
There
needed.
We go. I like that.
Because they were really good.
Yeah.
They were really good everywhere last year, really. And even their run defense, it wasn't bad.
Right.
Any stretch of the imagination. I mean, they were a top 25 run defense last season.
Right.
Or top 30 run defense last season. It's just, it's got to get a lot better if you're talking about, because like, what's the standard we're talking about here, Vince? Does the run defense need to get better for them to win more than 10 games or to win 10 games? Well, no. If they just here's the thing. If they just repeat what they did last year defensively, this is a top 10 defense easily, if not top 5. But that's not the standard we're looking at. The standard we're looking at is, are they going to play championship football?
Right.
That's the question. That's the challenge that they have, is can they play in a way that they don't let the Louisville game get out of hand the way that it did.
Right.
They don't let USC do to them at the end of 2022 what they did to them. They don't let, Georgia would have the big runs that really sparked that game in 2017, right? If you go back and remember that jet sweep that they broke for a big run. I mean, there's a lot of different things you look at and say, hey, can they just be more dominant in that part of the game? And they were good. Anytime you're ranking the top 30 in something, you're good. And the run game was one of their lowest rankings last season as far as like the core stats, meaning like points, any kind of yards thing, any kind of per play thing, red zone, third down, like the bigger numbers. There were some things where they didn't rank as high, tackles for loss per game, sacks per game, but Michigan didn't rank super high in those areas either last year. But overall, they were very, very strong. And that's just an area where if they're equal to everything else, every other statistic, they're just equal in ranking to last year and equal in production, but they make a jump in their run defense. This defense becomes the type of defense where you can go out and win a championship because of them. They're the driver in that. And they can even bring the offense along. And that's what they can do. Because, that's not something they did. Look, as good as they played against Ohio State for 56 minutes, the fact is the last 4, they didn't get it done. Right? I mean, that's an area for improvement. Yes, they held Louisville in check for 2.5 quarters, but they couldn't keep doing it. Now, it's partly not on them, but Clemson game. Yeah, the special teams and offense didn't help you, but you didn't do what you needed to do. You gave up 180 yards to a team that was playing without 2 of their starting offensive linemen and their starting running back, right? So there's a consistency thing there that's needed by this defense, and there is an area where you can get better. And so it's like, is it good? Yeah, but now it's got to get better. And it's really about the whole defense as a whole, and which we'll dive into, Vince. But the reality is if we're talking about playing championship football, there's a need for them to get better.
So let's break this down. So you said, do they need to be any better to be a top, win 10 games? Probably not, but that's not the goal of Notre Dame. This isn't Penn State. That's not the goal. So at Notre Dame, the goal is obviously to win championships. And so Notre Dame needs a championship level elite defense. And you did an awesome thing where you took Notre Dame stats and you compared them to championship level defenses over the last decade.
Level, the championship team.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
And I've shown this graphic before, Vince. Okay. And here's what it means. Now, I'm going to say this, and I love that somebody in the chat just pointed this out. The way that Al Golden runs his defense, I do not expect or think Notre Dame needs to be a top 5 team against the run.
Okay.
I don't think they need to be that good. I think they need to jump up at least 10 spots in the areas that I'm going to talk about, though.
Okay.
Right? Just the nature of the defense. But when I look at it, last year, 119 yards per game was Notre Dame's best season in some time when it comes to their run defense. You look at past years, they were at 131 the year before, 135 the year before that, 113 in the COVID year, but that's because they played a terrible schedule. And if you go back and look in their last 3 games against Syracuse, Clemson, and Bama, they gave up over 200 twice. They just played really bad teams that year. You look at in 19, they were at 151.7. 2018, a playoff team, they were 139.5. 2017, 154.5. 2016, 180. Well, we don't talk about the Bryan and Gorder years. It was literally the worst 3-year stretch in run defense in Notre Dame history. 168 and 113, and then go down to 106.7 down in 2012. So they've never had that team that was minus under 100 for one reason. Big reason is because they play Navy every year.
Well, yeah,
and you could hold Navy to 250 yards, and you held them over 100 yards below their average and did a great job.
Mm-hmm.
And
but
that
skews the average completely.
Yeah. Exactly. So now last year they actually did a pretty good job of shutting Navy down. They only gave up 126 yards rushing to Navy last season. So that was a better job. There was a stretch there in the middle of the season, though, and it happens to coincide with the 4 toughest games of the season. Between Ohio State and USC, they gave up 126 to Ohio State, which is actually pretty good, but they had the long run, which we'll talk about. 189 to Duke, 185 to Louisville. Then they held USC in check at 109. And then what's the only other big game they played all year? Clemson. And Clemson went for 176. So it was in those big games where the run defense just simply was not good enough. Mm-hmm. And they dominated a lot of the other teams, but they've got to get better there. And as I said before, this year you're playing 2 option teams. So the yards are going to be interesting to evaluate those. But when I look at yards per game, a lot of times in the past, Vince, I didn't do it for this year because they shut Navy down. But in the past, I would actually take the Navy game out.
I was just going to ask you about that.
And I would take any triple option game out of any team that I'm evaluating them against.
Yeah.
And then look at the numbers. I think that's more of a true test of where they are. Didn't need to do that last year. So when we talk about these numbers, I will look at not season-ending numbers because they play 2 triple option teams this year.
Sure.
It'll be what do you do in the 10 games against the non-option teams or how I'll evaluate it. But as you can see from this graphic, Vince, they were good last year. They weren't good enough. And if you go back and look at the recent champions, Michigan last year ranked 6th in rushing yards per game, 7th in yards per play. Georgia in 22 ranked 1st and 3rd. Georgia in 21 ranked 2nd and 2nd. Clemson in 2018 ranked 4th and 1st. Bama in 17 ranked 1st and 1st. Alabama in 2015 ranked 1st and 2nd. There were 4 exceptions to this standard, right? And that was Alabama in 2020, who was actually decent. Like if Notre Dame had Bama's numbers on run defense taken out, that's good. That's fine. I like to get a little bit better than that, but that's a pretty good number. But that they still were outside of 100. Then you had LSU in 2021 or 2019, who ranked 21st in rush defense, which is pretty much on par with what Notre Dame was last year. 1.8 yards difference in 0.2 yards per play. They ranked 21st and 32nd that season, right? Well, then you look at the 2016 Clemson team and the 2014 Ohio State team. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, well, what's different about those teams? Well, the reality is those teams had truly elite, in some cases, generational offenses. Mm-hmm. And that's a big difference. So when you look at, for example, 2020 Alabama, you're talking about a football team, Vince, that averaged – no, they weren't great stopping the run that year. And if you remember, they had a couple games, their defense just got lit up, right? Ole Miss lit them up on the ground. Florida had some – I mean, not Florida, but Tennessee had a little bit of success with them early. Obviously, Ohio State ran the ball somewhat well in them early in the title game, but they were not – Georgia ran okay on them. They weren't a great run defense. They were good. They weren't a great run defense during that COVID year. But, Vince, they averaged 48.5 points per game. Exactly. And they averaged 541.6 yards per game and 7.8 yards per play. You look at LSU in 2019, right? That was a team that averaged 48.4 points per game. And that was a team that averaged 568.4 yards per game and 7.9 yards per play. You know what? If Notre Dame gives up 125 rushing yards per game and they score 48 points per game and have 7.9 yards per play,
you'll be all right.
They'll be fine.
You'll be all right.
They'll win all of their games, right? I mean, so that's the thing you have to look at. I mean, there was a LSU in 2019 gave up over 400 yards rushing in a game to Ole Miss. They gave up 37 points and 400 yards rushing and allowed 9 yards per carry, and they won by 21 points, 58-37. So yeah, if you have an offense and go out and score 58 points, yeah, okay, you'll win a lot of games. But those are not those are not the rule. You know, even the 2016 Clemson team only averaged 39.2 points per game. They average over 500 yards of offense. They turned the ball over a lot during the season, if you remember correctly. But Deshaun Watson threw for over 4,500 yards that year, and ran for over 600 yards and accounted for 50 touchdowns that season. Again, that was a very dynamic, elite offense. And then, of course, Ohio State in 2014, their title team averaged 44.8 points per game, and they averaged their offense that season averaged. This isn't loading. Averaged 511.6 yards per game and 6.98, basically 7.0 yards per play. And that was with a bad start. I mean, they averaged 4.7 yards per play in a loss to Virginia Tech. Right. So, I mean, they were pretty good. They averaged 10 yards per play in the Big Ten title game, 6.9 yards per play against Bama, and 6.4 yards against Oregon in their last 3 postseason games. And they had over 500 yards in each of those games. So, yeah, you can give up a little bit of yards, on defense if you're doing that.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, sure.
Look at Notre Dame's averaging over 500 plus yards a game and
45 points and all that.
45 points a game. Yeah.
They'll be fine.
Then I'm not as worried about the defense. Right. They can be elite in a lot of places and, knocking on the door of elite and the run defense. And okay, that's cool.
Right.
I'm fine with that.
Right.
I'm fine with that.
The odds of Notre Dame having that kind of offense, I don't expect Notre Dame to have that kind of offense.
Correct.
Statistically, they may be there in some areas, but I don't expect them to be a 510 plus yard team. Maybe they're there around 7 yards per play because they'll have some really high numbers against some inferior opponents, but I don't think they're a team, Vince, that's going to do what Ohio State did in 2014. Which is go out there and hang 42 on Bama and run for 281 yards and 6.7 per play. I don't see them going into the title game against Oregon and rushing for 296, and scoring 42 points and having, what was it, 538 yards in the title game. I don't think they're that type of offense. I think they're going to be a lot better, but I don't think they're that type of offense. So you can't rely on that the way that other teams did. But I do think, for example, they're going to be better than offensively than what Michigan was last year. So if you look at Michigan's offense last year, they only averaged 35.9 points per game, and that was against a pretty soft schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan had a grand total of 0 games of 500 yards of offense last year. 0. They played 15 games. They didn't have a single game of over 500 yards in offense that season. And to just give you some context, Vince, in 2016, when Notre Dame went 4-8, they had 2 games of over 500 yards of offense, one over 600, and they were both against Power 5 teams. Now, they also had games of under 200, but you know what I mean? Like, so you could, when you look at Michigan, they had to be that dominant on defense last year, right? When you look at Georgia in 2021, especially, their offense was good, and statistically it was good, but it wasn't the kind of offense where you could go out there and carry the defense on a bunch of bad days. It wasn't that kind of offense, especially in 2021. Your defense had to be elite, and it was. And it made the offense better. So when I look at Notre Dame, Vince, like that year, for example, you remember the Clemson game that year. Georgia won 10-3 over Clemson, did not score a single offensive touchdown because they had a defensive touchdown and had a field goal. Well, if you don't have that kind of elite shutdown defense in 2021, you're not undefeated. And who knows if you're in the college football playoff at the end of the year, right? Because they lost to Bama in the SEC title game. Remember, that would have knocked them out of the college football playoff. They don't win the title that year. So you have to be elite on defense if you're not going to be elite on offense. And the best way to be elite on defense is to have a dominant run defense. Right. And now Notre Dame's defenses play a little bit differently. They play more balanced defensively, not a shut down the run and then be good against the pass. We're going to be an elite pass defense and also then be very good against the run. But this still has to be better, especially in big games. And that's at the end of the day, Vince, when I look at this team, that's the big thing. Here's a number for you. You guys know I love numbers, right? So here's a number for you. When you look at Notre Dame last season and you look at the games that they lost, you look at the Ohio State game, you look at the Louisville game, and you look at the Clemson game. In those 6 games, so we're looking at it, Notre Dame gave up 119 yards per game, right? If you look at the 4 games they lost, they gave up an average of 162.3 yards per game. So, I mean, end of story, right? And then the one game that they barely won, of their 10 wins, they only had one close game in the games they won. And that came against Duke. Yep. Gave up 185 rushing yards in that game. So in the 4 competitive games they had all year, they gave up well over 162 yards per game rushing. It's not good enough. It's not good enough.
Yeah, that cannot happen. Cannot happen. So thanks for putting together those stats, because that makes things, I'm a visual person. And so it's nice to be able to visually look. And look, there's always going to be outliers, when you put anything like this together. But I also think the explanation of those outliers makes perfect sense. I mean, you don't have to have a super elite run defense if your offense is scoring 45 points a game. I mean,
if Denbrock has the same offense this year that he had last year, that 119 yards per game Notre Dame does, not only do they go undefeated, they don't have a close game.
Right. Absolutely.
But you're not going to have that most likely, right? I mean, let's be honest.
Anticipate that that's going to happen.
Right.
Like,
nobody thought LSU was going to have that this year. But here's the thing.
Correct.
If you have that kind of offense, but you can't play defense, you're still going to not be very good.
That's true.
Because LSU did all that last year. Right. I mean, LSU was that type of team last year.
They couldn't stop anybody.
And it didn't do any good because, like you said, yes, exactly right. They couldn't stop anybody. I mean, LSU last year, Vince, averaged 45.5 points per game with Denbrock. Now they actually averaged more than that when he left. They were over 46 when he left. They only scored 35 in the bowl game.
They were average by 10 points.
Right. They averaged 543.5 yards per game and 8.4 yards per play.
Yeah.
Which is nuts. And they still lost 3 games.
Crazy.
They still won another game where they gave up 31 points, another game where they gave up 39 points, another game they gave up 35, another game they gave up 30, and another game they gave up 31. Like, they won 10 games last year. And in 5 games in which they won, giving up over 30 points.
What was their points per game average against? Do you have that in front of you?
Yes, I do, sir. I have that.
Because it's got to be high.
It was 28 points per game. And it was 28 points per game because they held Grambling to 10 and they held Army to none and Georgia State to 14. So, like, this is actually a good number. So here's their scoring defense against Power 5 teams only. LSU ranked
very low.
They gave up 34 points a game.
Wow.
Against Power 5 teams.
34 points a game.
Right. Notre Dame gave up 18.4.
It's no wonder they lost the games that they lost.
And exactly. But that's the point, though, is it can't be, okay, elite offense equals this, or elite.
Right. There has to be context.
It has to complement it, right? There has to be some complementary nature to it. And so Notre Dame, yes, we'll get to the offense a little bit, but the defense has to be better, especially in the big games, because that's where Notre Dame is at as a program. And I think the run defense is the most indicative part of that, Vince, is they are a very good football, a very good football program right now. There's no debating that. Anyone that wants to debate that, they are a top 7 to 8 football program right now. To me, there's no debating that. When you just look at the consistency over the last 5-6 years, there's nobody that's been as consistent as they have outside of the top 5-6 teams. And Michigan has not been that consistent compared to Notre Dame because they had the terrible COVID year, but they've overcome that and rose above that with 2 back-to-back college football playoff appearances, and then then the third year they go in and make it again, and then they win the championship, right? But as far as consistency, but the big difference is that Notre Dame has not been good enough in the biggest moments. And defensively, Vince, the pass defense has been excellent. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, let's look at the pass defense the last couple of years. They held Ohio State to 55.3% completion percentage last year in a win and only gave up 240 yards. They only averaged 6.3 yards per pass attempt last season, Ohio State. Notre Dame absolutely shut them down in the pass game. It was their lowest output of the regular season, right? The 6.3 it was better than what Michigan did against them. They had 9-point yard, and they averaged 9 yards per attempt against Michigan. Threw for 271 yards on 30 attempts. Against Notre Dame on 38 attempts, only had 240. The year before, against Notre Dame, C.J. Stroud only threw for 223 yards, 6.6 yards per attempt. That's it. right? So that they shut Ohio. I mean, look, they held their own against Ohio State. Marvin Harrison, best receiver the last couple of years, number 4 overall draft pick. In 2 games against Notre Dame, did not get to 100 yards total combined in 2 games against Notre Dame, right? You look at what they did against North Carolina 2 years ago. North Carolina gave pass for over 300 yards, but if you go back and remember that game, Vince, it was a blowout, and Carolina caught a couple big plays late against backups and then one blown coverage with like less than a minute left. It was like, I think at one point in time, Notre Dame was winning something like 45 to 17 or something like that. I'm going to go look. So it wasn't that close when the game was in doubt, they did a very good job of shutting North Carolina's pass game down. It was 38-14 at one point in time. Then they had an 80-yard touchdown pass. They were up 45-20 and they had threw a 64-yard touchdown pass against a blown coverage with a minute left, like minute and a half left in the game. They were dominant in that game. And then and even 2 years ago with Caleb Williams, I mean, he did not rip them up 2 years ago. They got hurt on the ground. USC ran on him, his scrambling against him. So, I mean, you look at all the big games. Louisville last year only passed for 145 yards against Notre Dame last season. Clemson only passed for 109, averaged 4.2 yards per attempt against Notre Dame's great pass defense last year. Right? Clemson the year before only threw for 191 yards and 4.8 yards per attempt. Right? What's killed Notre Dame in those big games has been running the football. That's been their Achilles heel. The only time I remember them not playing well in the pass game in a big moment is against Stanford 2 years ago. They played very poorly in the pass game against Stanford, and that factored into their loss. But in every other game, Vince, they've been dominant against the pass. In the big games, when they've struggled, it's been the run game, which includes quarterback scrambles. That's been the Achilles heel. So you want to be better in those games, this is the stat to point to.
Correct.
And that's setting the stage for it. That's why, I mean, you can argue. I don't know. There's no arguing against it, in my opinion. Some things to me are subjective. This is a no-brainer. The run defense has to be better in the big moments. That's a good thing, though, too, Vince, because it's not like you're just bad there. Look, there's some things that you can do to be better here. You're not terrible, because even last year, Vince, in the games where they gave up a lot of those yards that I was talking about, they weren't getting ripped up. They had that one big long run that Louisville had late in the game when the game was no longer in doubt. But Louisville only averaged 4.6 yards per play, despite having 2 long runs in that game. Clemson only averaged 4.1 yards per carry. Ohio State only averaged 4.7, and that's because they had a 60-yard touchdown run. Half of their yards came on one play. Right. So but the thing is, and you look at the year before against Ohio State ran for 172 against Notre Dame. In the game against Marshall that they lost, they gave up 219 rushing yards. You look at USC, crazy. They gave up 204 rushing yards. Right. So every game Notre Dame has not played well defensively, there's one thing in common: run defense.
Yeah.
Run defense hasn't been good enough.
You know what else is subjective? What shows we do. And we're not going to do a show that encompasses the pass defense needing to get better. Yes. So there you go.
Did somebody ask that?
No, I'm just saying. Okay, yeah. You were talking about things that are
yeah.
subjective and things that are not, like,
because we actually talked about doing something like that. But it's like, no, it's like so we ended up changing it to where, at some point we'll talk about the pass rush,
sure,
and how that can be better. But the pass defense under Al Golden has been elite.
Correct.
It's just been flat out elite.
Right.
And it's just keep on keeping on, baby. Exactly. That's what it comes down to,
Well, since you are the king of transitions today, by the way, what can they do?
Kind, sir.
It's been you're on fire, brother. I'm just telling you.
Thank you.
You've had 2 really good ones so far. And I know people don't necessarily notice these things, but I'm there. So
you just ruined the transition by your talking about the transition. I'm just letting you know.
I'm aware of that, but since I already brought up the objective subjective thing, it was already ruined. But it's all good. So let's talk about the things that can get better in order to make the rush defense as a whole get better, because there are a few things that we can point to that I think can get better almost overnight, to be perfectly honest with you. Just some different, how do I want to say this? Emphasis, some different fundamental work, things of that nature. Because if you know where you are lacking, for lack of a better term. If you know where you're lacking, then you can put more resources and more energy towards that. And I think that Notre Dame will do that moving forward. But we'll see. I mean, that's obviously the kind of wait and see situation that we're in. So what can they do to get better? The first thing, they got to tackle better. Okay.
Yeah.
And we've got some missed tackle numbers that we can give you because, again, you're a numbers guy and I love it. But we can give you some numbers that will show you where Notre Dame ranks as far as some missed tackles. And it's not great, to be honest with you. It's not great. The fact that Notre Dame has over 100 missed tackles last year, it's a little disturbing.
Well, it's not terrible either, though.
Okay.
I mean, because if you look at some of the other teams, right?
Yeah.
Like Ohio State had a great defense last year. They had 99.
Okay.
But that was one of their issues. I would argue that Ohio State had more in the pass game than they did in the run game. Notre Dame's issue is missed tackles. It's still a high number. Like Michigan last year in 15 games had 89.
Yeah.
And that's the numbers we're talking about. Georgia last year in 13 games had 85. That's 22 fewer tackles, missed tackles, I should say. And
that's
you
like
look
two,
at
that's like two a game, a little under two a game, which you know, we talk about the fact that they have those long, like, you know, the where they've struggled, they've had a long run, you know, where I'm not saying that missed tackle would be on that long run, but what if it is? You know what I mean? That makes a big difference.
I mean, against Ohio State, for example, they only had 7 missed tackles. If you only have 7 missed tackles and you put that out over the course of a 13 game season, right? So let's just do the numbers here real quick. That puts you at 91. That's right on slightly more than what Georgia had against the best team that you played in the regular season, right? But the one big missed tackle was the one Xavier Watts had on a 60-yard touchdown run. I mean, that's the thing is like it just takes one. And when I look at Notre Dame's tackling last year, Vince, it got better. There's no question it got better. Like that's the encouraging thing is it did get better, in my opinion. If you look at, if you just kind of look at how they were the year before, they actually had more missed tackles last year than they did the year before. But I think that this past year, the missed tackles were, I just kind of view it was kind of more opportunities than the year before. Right.
Sure.
So I actually think they got better in a lot of ways tackling this year than they did last year, than they were in 2022. But they still have to get better. But it really comes down to your missed tackle numbers on the second and third levels are the big ones, right? And you look at, for example, we talked about Notre Dame's numbers compared to Michigan, Ohio State, and Georgia last year. Well, Notre Dame had 26 missed tackles at the linebacker level. Michigan had 17 in 15 games, and Georgia had 17 as well, right? So that's almost 10 more than both of those teams. And for Michigan's case, you did it in 2 fewer games, which is a problem. And you look at the safety tackle. They had 23 missed tackles at safety last year. Xavier Watts led the way with 13, right? So we've talked a lot about this. That's an area where he needs to get a lot better is with the missed tackles and taking better angles of the football, which we'll get to. Michigan safeties had 14 and Georgia's had 20. And that was a high number. And Georgia had young safeties.
Yeah.
So you're talking about 49 missed tackles at the line. And I'm just talking starters.
You're right.
So at linebacker, I just went starters. And then safety, I went with the rotate. Like I did the top 3 rotation guys because all 3 of those teams use a rotation. And but you're talking about last year, Xavier Watts had 13. I mean, he's your All-American, and he was legit an All-American. I mean, he earned that All-American honor. He had 13 missed tackles.
That's way too many.
That's too many.
Yeah.
That's too many.
Way too many.
JD Bertrand also had 13 tackles and 12 missed tackles in 12 games. So, and JD was really good last year, like really good last year. But he's got to get, he had too many missed tackles. Yeah. Right. I mean, that's just the reality of it. He had a worse run. He had a worse run, like missed tackle rate last year than he did the year before. And so those 2 areas have to get better. Right. And the reason, I mean, Vince, if you could just say, if I could wave a magic wand and say that and the other part is like, you look at the D line. Let's talk about this first before I wave my magic wand. That's another one. And you think about how many times we saw Howard Cross or Riley Mills or those are the main 2 really had chances to blow guys up in the backfield and missed. And I actually think their missed tackle numbers should have been higher because when I looked at the D tackles and I saw that their missed tackle numbers at D tackle, they had Riley Mills at 4 missed tackles last season, and they had Howard Cross at 5. I can like think off the top of my head more than 4 missed tackles that Riley Mills had last year. And that's why I get so excited about what he can be, is start finishing on some of those plays. And you're going to get better, because if I could, this is my magic wand moment, Vince.
I love it. I love
your
magic
wand. I could wave a magic wand and just improve one thing about this football team, just one thing on the defense, and they are a much better. They're one of the 5 best tackling teams in college football, and that's the only thing that changes. Then this is problem solved. Seriously, because if they were a really good tackling team, if Xavier Watson makes that one tackle against Ohio State, I don't think they go down and score, and now you win that football game. I'm not blaming the loss on Xavier, because Xavier's play is a big reason why Ohio State couldn't do anything offensively that game, right? But it's an example of what I'm talking about. Those are areas where they have to get better and perform better in tackling, and that will answer a lot of things. Now, there's other things they can do to be better, and some of those things that lead to being better tackling, Vince, block destruction is one. Be better with block destruction. That's going to help you be better tacklers, because you're going to get to the ball a little bit quicker. Take better angles to the football. Those are things that you can do. That's Xavier's biggest problem, honestly, is his angles.
Yeah,
he doesn't take great angles to the football. And that's
honestly, that
experience can.
Yeah, I was going to say that's an experience thing, and I know that he's been a safety for long enough that he became the best in the land. But that is an experience coming downhill like that. Making tackles, that takes experience to know which angles to take and when to come down and how fast to come down and those things. You can come down like a heat-seeking missile, and it doesn't take much of a move from the ball carrier to get you completely thrown off. So you've got to know when to break down, all of those different things. And that's an experience thing. Unfortunately, you cannot simulate that, in my opinion, super well in practice. I mean, you can. There's obviously downhill tackling drills and things that you can do, but the only thing you can do is experience it in a game, in my opinion.
Well, I actually do think there's a lot of things you can do to improve taking better angles of the football. But at the end of the day, all those things are somewhat static, the drills they do. But to your point, there's drills it's like with a lot of things. There's drills you can do to get the technique down, to get them experience in practice. But to me, drills are experience for a guy like Xavier Watts. Like, seeing it in practice a million times is going to make him better prepared for it in games. So I think your point about experience is correct, Vince. But last year was the first year that for an entire season, he had no other responsibilities but playing defense.
That's true.
Because remember, they kind of cross-trained him a little bit early in 2022. So I do think it's experience, game experience being one, and then just the rep after rep after rep after rep of doing it in practice. And so those are things that I think they can improve, but the execution on Saturday has got to get better. And a lot of that's just understanding the angle you have to take based on where your help is and based on the angle in which the ball carrier is running. Yeah, that was something that when I look at the linebackers, for example, that was one of Maris' biggest problems. Maris just didn't take good angles of the football when he would miss tackles. JD's issues, he had some length issues that kind of hurt him at times, let's be honest. And then sometimes, he'd be a little bit out of control. So those are things you can work on, right? Like, don't be out of control, come to balance. And if you tackle the guy for -1 instead of -4, that's okay. Or a 0 instead of a -3, that's okay. It's better than missing on the -3 and he runs for 5, right? It's understanding those things. And that's what I say is a big part of what I think this team needs to get better. And if that's the only thing that improves, they will be much better. Because, like, Vince, what's not on here that normally is on here? We're going to go through a couple more things. There's nothing on here about fixing the scheme, putting more emphasis on stopping the run, caring more about stop. I don't think that's a problem, right? Like Al Golden's point is, when he talked about, like, I don't really care about being like the number one run defense, he was not saying we don't care about stopping the run. He was like, I don't care about where we rank. Right. Our goal is to be as disruptive and disciplined as possible.
Right.
and it's going to manifest itself in,
you
in
let
a
the
lot
chips
of
fall
ways.
where they may, essentially.
Right.
Yeah, right. If you do your
Obviously, there's a
job.
concern for wanting to stop the run.
Yes.
That's partly why they do what they do. And if they didn't care about stopping the run, their off defense would have been a lot worse last year against the run.
But again,
it's just that we're not going to commit all of our resources, put 8-9 guys in the box, and make sure you don't run the football. Right? We're going to be gap sound.
Sure.
We're going to be zone sound, and we're going to be aggressive. And then that's going to kind of take care of both, in my opinion.
Well, and the ranking thing, not being worried about where you're ranked, and I want to go back to what you said before. If you put all your emphasis on just the ranking alone, you're not going to be happy because you do play 2 triple option teams. I mean, bar none, right? And at the end of the day, the rankings will take all 12 teams into account, and there's plenty of teams out there that don't play triple option teams. So even the ranking itself will be skewed. I mean, I like how you do it, where you take out triple option teams if it's, if it inflates the numbers artificially. But now, obviously, they're not going to do that for the ranking. So you can't just hang your hat on the ranking. You also have to use context is the best way to put it. And I think at Irish Breakdown, we do a good job of that. Toot, toot. All right. Let's move on to another facet of the run defense getting better, and better block destruction is a big piece of this. We've talked about this a lot, whether it's linebackers, whether it's defensive linemen, to be honest with you. There have been issues in the past where the block destruction has just not been good. They can't get off blocks in a timely fashion in order to make a play. And that it has to get better across the board, in my opinion.
Yep. Linebacker, that's a big issue, and D-line, that's a big issue.
Yeah.
Not a big issue. It's not a big issue. It's one of those, it can be a problem at times.
Right.
They actually, that's one area where I think they got a lot better last year against the run, but there's still room to get better. Here's one thing that helps with that. Be long. Like, you want to know why Notre Dame values length? I was having a conversation with somebody close to the program 4 nights ago. I have to tell you about it afterwards, Vince.
Nice.
And he's just reiterizing, like, look, Coach Freeman's big thing is he wants to get longer. There's a lot of reasons for that. But the primary reason is the longer you are, the harder it is to be blocked. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
And there's again, that's not the only reason, but it's a big reason for it. Obviously you want to be long because then it's harder for quarterbacks to throw over and around you if you're longer and all this. I mean, so there's a lot of reasons. If you're a DB, you cover more ground when you're long. We've talked about that.
Wide receiver, you have more catch radius.
Right.
I mean all of those things. Yeah.
But a big reason for defense is it just helps keep blockers off your body.
Exactly.
If you've got 31-inch arms and as a receiver, and I've got 32-inch arms as a DB, then I'm going to have a chance to get off of you. If I'm a defensive end and I got 34-inch arms and your offensive lineman has 32.5-inch arms, I'm going to have a better chance if my technique is sound of keeping him from just absorbing me, or consuming me. And so those things are all part of it, right? I mean, those are all part of it when it comes to being disruptive and being effective against the run. There's no doubt. And that ties into being better tacklers.
Sure.
Right. And then it ties into our next point, which is the D-line does need to be more disruptive, right? Get off those. Like, I thought the D-line did a better job of getting off blocks last year overall, but I think there's a level where they can be faster doing so in those situations where that's their goal. Sometimes the goal is, I'm not supposed to get off this block. My goal is to drive this lineman as far back into the backfield so my linebacker can come right off my butt and blow up the play.
Exactly.
It's not every time that you're asking your nose tackle to go make a play on the ball, which is why it's amazing that Howard Cross had as many tackles as he had last year, right? Because the defense isn't geared for Howard Cross to have 66 tackles.
No.
Like maybe 50, maybe. You know what I mean? But like, he did that because he was just that disruptive, and he was actually very good at getting off blocks. He was probably, consistency-wise, the best that they had up front last season when it comes to making tackles in that type of situation, Vince. So, those are things that you look at and say, man, this team, if they can improve in that regard, then they're going to have a chance to be really, really good this season. Really, really good when it comes to stopping the run. Now, the other part of it too, Vince, is when you talk about being disruptive up the middle, the D-line getting off blocks better is going to help. I think being a little bit more forceful at the point of attack. There were times when they would catch a little bit, and I think part of that was just the number of snaps they played. You know, you kind of get to the points where they were just a little tired. Hopefully, as the younger guys play more and more and more, then they'll be better. I think Jason Onye coming off the bench is a guy that could really help this defense be better against the run because he has that disruptive athletic talent. You know, Gabriel Rubio being healthy, they were a much better run defense last year when Gabriel Rubio was healthy. They were. And once he got hurt early, he just never quite seemed healthy for a chunk of the year, Vince, in my opinion. But when he was healthy, they were better against the run. They were. And it's not a coincidence that he didn't play against Louisville and their run defense wasn't that good. It's not a coincidence, in my opinion. He didn't play against Central Michigan and the run defense was okay, but not great. He matters. Because when those guys are dominant and getting a push, it just makes the linebacker so much more productive.
Absolutely.
And
because they don't have to scrape off. They don't have to block the strike
because
they don't have anybody there in the way. And so, that it's – I don't want to say it's old school thinking because it absolutely works in the new school. But the old school thinking was always, fill a gap, keep the offensive line off of your linebackers and things like that. And that's still, I think, a point of emphasis at times in defenses today, right? But it's more scheme driven and things like that. But at the end of the day, if your defensive line is occupying the offensive line, your linebackers are going to be able to play better, period.
Right.
I mean, even if they're good at block destruction, they're not getting slowed down by having to block destruct. So,
let's pull this graphic back up. Right. So Notre Dame last year ranked 59th in tackles for loss. Because one thing is we talk about a lot of things. Finishing is Notre Dame's got to finish better in a lot of ways, and the run game is the biggest area defensively where they can and should finish better. Last year, Notre Dame ranked 59th in tackles for loss. Now this is per game. Michigan last year ranked 34th. Georgia ranked 20th in 2022. They ranked 10th in 2021. Bama ranked 10th in 2020. LSU ranked 19th in 2019. Clemson's 18 team ranked first. Alabama in 2017 ranked 11th. Clemson in 2016 ranked first. Bama in 15 ranked fifth. And then Ohio State in 14, for all their defensive woes, they were super disruptive. They ranked fifth. Note the lowest one was Michigan last year at 34th. Notre Dame ranked 59th. So that's the thing. It's finish better. More disruptions is needed. Now Notre Dame is a very disruptive defense overall. They create a lot of havoc, so to speak, is like a term that a lot of people use. But they didn't finish well enough. They'd have a lot of 0-yard gains and 2-yard gains that should have been -2s and -3s and -4s. And that's a big thing for me, Vince, especially for the defensive line. That is an area especially where I think they have to do a better job there. I want to see more tackles for loss from the defense as a whole.
Yeah.
And I want to see more. And I think this is where Riley Mills has to be better. Riley Mills, as the 3 technique, has going to have a chance to have a lot more tackle for losses this season, and he's got to make them. He's got to make more of those plays. Mm-hmm. And then if they're still as good as they need to be, then the linebackers should be making more tackle for loss plays, in my opinion.
Agreed.
I think they need to be disruptive as well. That's going to be a big key for me, Vince, when I look at this football team is, are they, if we're talking about this, success, are they better at creating negatives? Are they better at creating tackles for loss and things along those lines? That's going to be a big, big key for me for Notre Dame, because if they can get more of those -2s and more of those -3s and plays like that, then they're going to be more effective, in my opinion. And to me, it's a big part of really being that kind of elite defense that I think they're capable of. Because here was an interesting stat I will say about Notre Dame last year. So Notre Dame last season ranked 53rd in total tackles for loss, and here's 59th or 54th in total in tackles for loss per game. They ranked 25th in most tackle for loss yards. So like when they made plays, they'd make plays. So it's not the big negatives that I'm talking about. It's those -2s and -3s that we're turning into 0s and 1s and 2s. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a big difference as an offense, Vince, being 2nd and 8 versus 2nd and 12.
Yeah.
Big difference for me as an offense between being 3rd and 5 and 3rd and 8. Big difference on what I can do. And so it's those type of things. It's, like you'd have that. And here's what we'll talk about. Like, oh man, there was 119 yards per game, guys. That's pretty good, right? Like, yes, it's good. These are the type of things that we're missing. Like we talked about the tackles in the 60-yard game, but a lot of what it is, Vince, it's that play where the first linebacker would miss at -3 and the second linebacker would clean up at 0.
Right.
So that's still a good play, right? Or the D tackle would miss at -2 and then the linebacker would clean it up at +2, right? Like that's still a good play. The defense is very good, but they need to start making more of those -2 plays. And because it's not like they miss at -2 and it's 60, right? Like that's not happening, right? In the 60-yard run that they gave up against Ohio State, there was a really bad run fit by I think it was Marist. And then obviously, because Marist didn't help either. Marist had a horrible play on that, but Xavier still had a chance to make that play. It's those type of things, Vince, where it's not -2 turns into 60. That hasn't happened to this defense, and you need to make sure it doesn't continue to happen. But some of those -2s need to be -2s.
Correct.
Instead of +2s or +3s or even +5s. Again, it doesn't look like a bad play, but you didn't fit correctly. So the other linebacker had to flow over top and tackle it for 4-yard gain on 1st and 10. So it's 2nd and 6. When in reality, if the fit was better, or if the block destruction from the 3 tech was better, or the nose is better, or the 5 technique did a better job of coming inside and actually making that play, it's not 2nd and 6. It's 2nd and 12. And now we're in a situation where, okay, now what we do best is now playing into our hands, because now do you want to try and run again? And hopefully you can get 5-6 yards on a run, or do you want to start trying to throw the ball now and try to get in that way? Well, that's what we do best. So that's why I think those things, and that kind of the final point of that, Vince, is to just wrap this part up. A lot of what I'm talking about is that early down success.
Correct.
That's where the key is getting a lot of those first down wins and negatives in that type of situation. Finishing at the ball better, the first guy. Because you know what made Notre Dame so good last year is the reason they didn't give up a lot of big plays is because they were such a great swarming defense. So guy would make 2 guys miss, and then he's getting tackled by the 3rd guy, and you're like, man, that guy made a bunch of dudes miss, and he gained 4. Like they were a really good swarming defense. What needs to happen this year is they still swarm, great, whatever, but that first guy needs to start making more plays.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be the key when presented with those opportunities. Now, what I'm not talking about here, Vince, is the 3 technique is shoots through the gap, takes that lineman with him, and forces a cutback at -4, and then somebody else makes a tackle. That's not what I'm talking about. That's his job was to get vertical, force the cutback. His job was not necessarily to make the play. Now, if you win that badly, you can blow the guy up, and then you've made the play. Those things are good. So when I talk about the first guy, I'm talking about, you force the cutback, that Mike needs to be there at -2. Or that backside tackle or backside end needs to clean that up. I did my job of forcing the guy, to cut early at -4. Your job is now to clean him up at -1 instead of you didn't get where you needed to be on time and he got +2. Those are things I'm talking about. And that's yeah.
So do you think that one of the reasons that Notre Dame fans and analysts and the like are excited about some of the new blood that is coming into this defense, because they are in theory longer, in theory more athletic? I mean, that's the party line, right? These guys are longer, they're more athletic, they're faster at the second level, so they can come down and make these plays. I mean, there is some truth to that, otherwise that wouldn't exist. But I mean, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater as far as what the second level was able to do last year. But I think people get excited about what the potential is for the personnel that is going to have a much larger role going into this year in this regard. These tackles for loss, these coming downhill, making those plays behind the line of scrimmage.
The question is do you think because of that there's a chance for them to be better in that regard? Is that kind of
I think that's what I'm insinuating, that's what a lot of Notre Dame fans think is automatically going to happen because of the change of personnel.
Well, here's the concern that I would have.
Yeah.
I believe this defense is going to have more negative production from the linebacker level than it did last year. And it was good last year. Like J.D. Bertrand was very disruptive last season, right? Like very disruptive. You go look at his numbers last season, whether you want to look at Pro Football Focus, whether you want to look at there's another stat thing that Ryan sent me that I was looking at last night. I'm still trying to understand part of it, but you look at it and it's like, man, he was a really disruptive linebacker, like a lot of havoc plays and things like that. Jay didn't finish well enough.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing that I need to see is I need to see him finish better. And he's going to have to do a better job there, Vince. I mean, that's just the reality. He's going to have to do a better job of finishing at the ball. Right.
Sure.
And so when I think about looking at Drake Bowen and I start thinking about, you talk about Jack Kaiser, who had a very high finish rate, right? Those are things you look at and say, hey, I think they're going to finish more. I think there's better size there at Mike now. I think Drake and Jack are even more explosive athletically than Maris and JD were, right? Because of the three veterans, Jack was the best athlete. They're all good athletes. We've argued this for years. And the NFL just showed that, right? I mean, JD was outstanding at the Senior Bowl. That's a big reason he got drafted, despite not being able to do the pro day,
100%.
despite not being able to do the combine. Nobody got a 40 time on JD Bertrand, and he still went in the 5th round. Why? Because the film was really good. Jack's even more explosive than JD was, and they're similar in size. You look at Peyton or Drake Bowen, he's 6'2", 240, right? Kingston Viliamaasa, 6'3", 240. Jaden Osbury's like 6'1", over 6'1", 215, 220. Jalen Sneed's only 6'1 and a half, 218, 220, but he's long and really explosive athletically. So I think they're going to make more plays at linebacker. Here's the question.
Yeah.
But I also am concerned that they're going to have more misses, more mistakes, more run fit misses, more run fit mistakes than they did last year when they had, 2 fifth-year seniors. Now, the counter argument to that, and this is something that Marcus Freeman brought up in an interview I did with him this summer, his thing is, I'm not actually worried about that. I'm more worried about the transfers, because his point was basically this: Drake Bowen has as much time in this defense going into 2024 as J.D. Bertrand had in this defense going into 2023. Right? I mean, that's the reality. J.D. he had 5th-year player, but he'd only been in this defense for 2 years.
Right. That's true.
Right.
Good
and
point.
Drake's been in this defense for 2 years. With Drake, you didn't have to deprogram Drake from what was before.
That's true.
It's just, okay, this is what we're doing. And now I'm not as bought into that argument, because there's still the game experience aspect of it, right? Where JD could pick it up faster because he had all the game experience that Drake lacks. But I get the point, right? Like, so that's going to be the thing is, can you increase? So like, here's the thing. Here's tackle for loss numbers here and, mistake plays here. The question is you're going to get more of this, but can you get more of this than you get more of this, right? Can you have more tackles for loss and more big plays than you have mistakes?
Right.
So
it doesn't
even
just
if you have
offset.
more, if you have more mistakes, that's fine. But does the production outweigh those mistakes that you're still pretty good and you get better? If you have more production, but you have an equal dip in assignment correctness, then it negates the jump in big plays. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
perfectly.
so that is the concern about having basically a new look. Because even though Jack Kaiser's a 6th-year senior and this is his 4th year, basically a starter, it's at a position he's never started a game at before. He started 2 games inside in 2022 against Carolina, and then 2023 against Central Michigan. He started a Mike when JD was out. This year, JD was out with an injury. And in 2022, if you remember correctly, JD was out with the targeting he got at the end of the Cal game the week before. So that's why Jack started that game of Mike, and then JD came in the second half. And the Notre Dame defense was pretty good against North Carolina in the first half of that game. Now, the difference is that was a team that liked to throw the football a lot. So it fit more into what Jack could do.
Sure.
How's he going to be against teams that are going to run the ball better? That's a bit more of a question that I have, Vince.
Right.
And I think that's something we're going to see in game 1. I think they're going to come in. I mean, look, Colin Klein likes to run the football. That's what they made their living on.
Yeah, that's what I would do. Look, if you're trying to find a weakness in Notre Dame's defense, right? There's not a lot of them. Okay. Right. And a perceived weakness would be a new starter at middle linebacker. I mean, that's the heart of anybody's defense.
Who's young. Right.
Exactly. 100%. And so if I'm looking for a way to try to exploit Notre Dame's defense, that's my number one spot. Is I'm going to try to go right at the heart of the defense and make the middle linebacker, the brand new kid, make some plays. Right? I mean, that's absolutely what I would do. And so, look, Notre Dame's not stupid either. They know that that's what A&M is going to try to do, and so they will, I'm sure, have something to combat that. And again, at the end of the day, Drake just needs to play well. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what needs to happen. He's got plenty of guys around him, also, But and I go back to when we talked about the defense and linebackers and all of that, and Drake just needs to be solid this year. He can have flashes of greatness, and that's great. But I don't think this defense needs him to be great all the time.
They don't need him to be Manti Te'o in year one.
No, not at all. He just needs to be solid. Don't make any obvious, big time mistakes and on a regular basis.
Right.
Because look, he's a rookie. He's going to make mistakes. People have to understand.
And you live with it. And you don't say, put the even younger guy. Put the even younger guy in the game.
Right. Exactly. Right? Yes. 100%. So
but that's the other thing though too, is let's not forget that though. I do believe Kingston's going to be rotating with Drake. And I do think they're going to play more of a rotation this year than they did last year. And they should. Again, 16-game season, you need to do that more. That's good. So it's not just Drake. Kingston had a lot more mental mistakes in the spring game than Drake did. And he should have. He's in his first semester in the system, right?
Absolutely.
But the point is, how quickly can Kingston eliminate those things too? How quickly, if Jalen Snead's going to be playing more at will, how quickly can he eliminate those mistakes? Because he made a lot of those mistakes last year.
Right.
So that's my one concern about the defense is, will the new younger guys, Drake, Kingston, Jalen Snead, Jaden Alsbury, whoever, Kahanu Kia, will those guys be able to limit the mistakes? The good news is, if we're being honest, Maris was much better last year. He was actually a pretty good player. Ended up being a third-round draft pick.
Just crazy.
He still had a lot of mistakes. He still had a lot of missed run fits. He was a lot better than he was.
Sure.
But he still had his fair share of mistakes. So you expect with Jack Kaiser to be a little bit better there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just can the mic not have as so Jack's better here, but you make sure that the mic doesn't fall even more behind where JD was. That's the give and take, Vin. That's gonna make this so interesting.
Absolutely. Oh, it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. There's a lot of easy answers. So, what are you looking forward to, in fall camp and all that? Linebacker rotation and how they play is right up there for me. I mean, it's right up there for me because I think there's a lot of question marks there. And there's a lot, and I don't mean question marks in a bad way, but just things we need answered, right? And I think they just have the ability to be really good, but they're all very young, and you have to take that into account. You can't panic. And I'm not saying the coaching staff is going to panic, and frankly, fans, that's their job, is to panic. But you can't go overboard on one mistake. You just can't. You got to look at the whole picture. You got to look at the whole picture and how they're playing.
So what do we need to see, Vince? Better tackling at the linebacker and safety level, especially. I do want to see the D-line finish a little bit better, be a little bit more disruptive, right? And then how quickly can the young guys get going? Mm-hmm. Now, I do think this too. I do think overall they're going to be a more athletic defense overall.
Yes, I agree.
And that I think helps as well, right? I think they're going to be a little bit rangier, a little bit more athletic, and that's kind of getting to your point. Hey, I missed this tackle because I was a step behind last year, in DJ Brown's case. Well, I don't think Rod Hurd and Adon Schuler are going to have as many of those issues. They're going to be where they need to be.
Correct.
And you don't get that time to kind of run and gain ground and put me in space because I'm getting to you before you can get rolling. Because, once a back gets kind of downhill, then he can be a problem. He can run you over. He can make you miss. The goal of a defense is never let that guy get going downhill.
Right.
Constantly make him have to cut and do all, you know what I mean? And then people are there to clean up. So those are all aspects of it, Vince, that are making it. So, look, they were pretty solid on run defense last year. If they can be better, this defense has a chance to really be special. And it we focus on a lot of the negatives, but this is okay, getting to that championship level, Vince, as we showed up before, they're close. That's the thing. They're close. Last year, that was the closest they've been since 2012 to looking like. But that's a really good championship caliber run defense for what Notre Dame does. They were close last year. Now it's just about being a little bit better in those big moments, and these are the ways to do it. And if they can make that jump, Vince, it's going to be exciting to watch this defense this year. And just real quick, we had the all opponent show 2 days ago.
Yep.
Right. What's the one thing we said? Not a lot of really good offensive lines on the schedule. Right. Well, you start off with one right away. Like that's the thing is dominate those matchups you're supposed to dominate. And but some of the better teams they're going to play do have pretty good offensive lines coming back. So the numbers could be really good and look like they've made the big jump, but Florida State should have a pretty good offensive line this year. USC should be better on the offensive line this year. I think Texas A&M is going to have a pretty decent offensive line this year. Louisville should have a pretty good offensive line this year. Those are the teams you got to worry about. And so you are going to be tested. And so how are you going to perform in those games is going to be the big key.
It's going to be fun to watch. And I love the fact that we're basically splitting hairs to a degree because Notre Dame was a top 30 run defensive team. But if they want to reach the pinnacle, they've got to be better.
Yeah, it's not about splitting hairs per se, Vince. To me, it's about evaluating it for what it was, which is pretty good. But then remembering what the standard that we're truly holding it against.
And
it's not comparing them to past defenses anymore that were giving up 140, 150 yards per game rushing.
Right.
They were much better than that. It's okay, but you're still not on the level you need to be a true championship D group. That's the key.
And that's absolutely my point is that we're talking about a team that we want to see get better from a top 28, top 30 finish. And that's not good enough. Like that's the point that I'm making. And that's what I'm excited about when we're talking about this defense is, they're really good, but they have a chance to be elite. And that's the conversation that we get to have because we cover this Notre Dame team. So I'm excited about it. So that's going to do it for this part of our podcast, the defense, the run defense and getting better to become an elite defense and a championship level defense. Make sure you hit that like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, share with your family and friends, of course, and then jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. A lot of good stuff going on over on the board, some good conversation, some good back and forth, which I really, really do like. And there was a really good recruiting intel put up there by Bryan, I think a day or two ago, which is still catching some fire and it's still exciting, but you wouldn't know about it unless you're on the board. So jump on the boards, boards.irishbreakdown.com for all the latest news and notes and nuggets. That's where you get it. Let's move on to part 2 of today's, or topic number 2, I should say, Bryan, of today's podcast. And we're going to flip it to the other side of the ball. And we're still talking run game. And we're going to talk about Notre Dame's run game. And I know there was some conversation, maybe a little one-sided conversation early on in the chat about how, no, I'm not worried about Notre Dame's run game and what they do. They're always good. They're always in position to be really good with the run game. And that's
on offense?
On offense.
Okay.
I'm just telling you what was there. And so, but we're talking about it because Notre Dame is always going to be a team that wants to run the football and be good at running the football. And their entire offensive strategy from a head coach down is that you got to win in the trenches. And we just talked about stopping the run game defensively. And now we're going to talk about the run game offensively and how and what it needs to do for this Notre Dame team to get to where they want to be in 2024.
This is not a conversation about numbers. At the end of the year, I expect Notre Dame to be good numbers-wise running the football. I mean, they were 189 yards 2 years ago, 5.3 yards per carry. They were 189.1 yards per game 2 years ago, 4.6 yards per carry. Last year, they were at 185.7 yards per game, so slight dip. But again, slight dip in shorter games.
Yeah.
Because of the rule changes. But they were at 5.3 yards per play. I mean, like the end of the year numbers are going to be good. Last year, Notre Dame running the football, they ranked 28th in yards per game, but they ranked 13th in yards per play, right? Those are all good numbers. I got no beef with that. But again, it comes down to, but can you run the ball when it matters most? And the reality is they really couldn't, not consistently enough. They had good yards against Ohio State, but they didn't do it. They chose not to do it when it mattered most. That was a choice, not an inability to do it. I actually think the offensive line was poised to put that game away. They did not run the ball very well against Duke. The numbers look good. 159 yards, 5 yards per carry. That's because you had a 4th and 16 scramble by the quarterback on the last drive of the game and then a 32-yard walk-off at the end of the game. Yeah. You were sub 100 yards rushing going into that final drive. That's what he says sometimes. Numbers can lie to you.
Yes.
Right? Oh, they ran for 5 yards of play against Duke. What are you talking about? The O-line got their butts kicked. Yeah, I just pointed that out.
I wasn't feeling good about the run game when they handed it off to Estime at that point in the game. I was like, what
they
are
weren't
you
trying
doing?
for a 32-yard walk-off.
No, they weren't.
Aldrich, you had great blocks
on
that play. Holden Stace had a huge block on that play. I think it was it Blake Fisher? I think it might have been Blake Fisher and Rocco had really big blocks.
It went off the right side, so that would make sense.
And then Duke guy missed a tackle because he can't handle Aldrich in a big moment. I mean, that's just in space, I should say. But overall, it was not good. You look at the Louisville game; they ran for 44 yards, couldn't get the run game going early in the game.
Yeah, that was ugly.
You look at the Clemson game; 183 yards rushing, a little bit skewed. You know what I mean? They had some quarterback scrambles. They had a couple plays where Clemson vacated and Sam just tucked it and took off for 20-some yards. Aldrich ran well, but the other thing is Aldrich played like a man possessed in the first half of that game. The line didn't block as well as the numbers. So you look at it again and you say, yeah, the run defense just was not good enough in some of the biggest moments. In 2022 against Ohio State, run defense, not good against Ohio. Or run offense was terrible against Ohio State. Got their butts kicked against Ohio State.
Yeah.
Didn't run the ball very well against Marshall. Didn't run the ball very well against Stanford. Put the ball on the ground in some big moments. Yeah. Ran all over Clemson. Just dominated Clemson. Couldn't run the ball against USC in the end of the year. Right? So, again, go back to some of the great Notre Dame rush teams. 2017, best Notre Dame rushing offense since Lou Holtz was the head coach. Had what? So let's see, first 9 games of the year, they ran for 422, 515, 182 against the number 2 rush defense in the country, 333, 341, 377, 318, 380. Against Georgia in a loss, 55. Against Miami in a loss, 109. Right? Against Stanford in a loss, they went for 154, only 3.5 yards per carry. Now, there's a lot of things that went into that, but the reality is, running the ball, being a great running team is not just about numbers. We're talking about, can you be a championship football team? And for Notre Dame to be a team that is going to compete for a championship, they can win a title this year, Vince, averaging 190 rushing yards per game, 185 rushing yards per game. But it's, can you run it when it matters most?
Correct.
Can you impose your will on teams? And can you do it can you go on the road? Like, you want to know the best way to go beat A&M on the road? Shut down their run game, and then you run it down their throat. I'm not saying running it 55 times. I'm saying, but when you want to run on them.
Exactly.
You want to be able to go out and beat USC on the road at the end of the year. They're going to have a high octane offense. You're trying to play off for playoff. You're playing for playoff positioning. What helps to win those games? Go out there and run the ball down their throat. Mm-hmm. Right? You want to control the atmosphere when Florida State comes to town. Control the line of scrimmage. Right? Those are the things, Vince, that factor into it. Last year, Louisville controlled the game on both sides of the ball in the line of scrimmage.
Yes, they did.
Both sides of the ball. Notre Dame didn't.
You could feel it, man. You could feel it.
Yeah, because the receivers were getting open.
Yes, they were.
And there were mistakes, drop balls, penalties by Blake Fisher and all that, but they just got their butts kicked in the line of scrimmage. And that's the key. So yards per game, yards per play, end of the year, all that stuff's fine. It's going to be about, but can you play champ? Can you run the ball like a champ? Again, you don't have to be a team that runs the ball for 1 million yards, but right. Look, perfect. We talked about Michigan last year. Notre Dame had averaged, I just said, right, 185 rushing yards per game. Isn't that what I just said? Okay, mm-hmm. That's pretty good, right? It's pretty good. Notre Dame averaged 5.3 yards per carry. Michigan won a championship last year. You think of Michigan, you think what? Really good running team, right? Michigan last year, Vince, averaged 169.1 yards per game rushing and only 4.5 yards per carry. That's it. But you know what? They went on the road and beat Penn State. They ran for 227. Didn't throw the ball a single time in the second half. When they went and played Washington title game, they ran for 303. They ran the ball when it mattered most. They didn't pile up numbers against bad teams. They ran the ball when it mattered most, right? And, the year before, Michigan ran for 238.9 yards per game, right? And but they weren't as good of a team, right? So it's not so much about the numbers. It's about, can you run it when it matters most? That's going to be the key. And Notre Dame's going to have to get to that point in time. Get to that point in the run game.
Yeah.
And they haven't been there in a while, where they could just go out in the biggest games week after week and we're going to run on you. And you felt like they could kind of do that when Lou was the coach. You felt like they could do that. This team has to develop that type of mentality. And it's going to be hard to do that this year, Vince, honestly. It's going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Well, okay, so there you go. Transition time. How can they do that? I mean, it's not impossible. It may be an uphill climb potentially, but how can this 2024 version of Notre Dame football on the offensive side of the ball, how can they at least get close to meeting those expectations? I mean, do they even have the players to do it? Do they have the scheme to do it? All of these different things. How can they make that happen? Do they have the pieces in place?
Well, the first thing is the good news that if you look at, there's going to be some concerns about this. And this might be the biggest question mark I have about the football team is, can they run the ball at a high level?
Sure.
And we'll get into reasons why, but I want to start off with a little bit of a positive, right? You have to be an explosive and efficient team offensively and running the football, especially explosive and efficient. The explosive part should be there because, A, you do have talented offensive linemen and they're going to open up holes at times. You at least know that. But you got 2 home run hitters at running back. Really, I'd say 3 because Kedron Young can be a home run hitter as well, or Aeneas Williams, whoever that number 3 back is. You are a much more explosive group of backs than you were in 2022. These 2 backs also have a lot more experience going into the year they're taking over than what Logan Diggs and Audric Estime had going into 2022. Going into 2022, when Audric and Logan combined for over 1,700 rushing yards and were a dynamic 1-2 punch, they had 290 yards and 3 touchdowns the year before, Vince, combined. Logan had 230. Audric had 60, and he got almost all of that in one game, if you remember about that time, Vince. And so when you look at the 2 kids from this year, you're talking about 2 players that Jeremiah rushed for 385 by himself last year, and Jadarian ran for 272. And so you're talking about 2 guys that have, what's that, about 657 yards? Is my math correct on that, Vince? 385 plus 272. I think I might have got that wrong. No, 657. Yeah. And averaged over 5.5 yards per carry last year as basically 2 first-year players. Because I know Jadarian was on the team the year before, but he literally didn't practice the entire year because of the
right.
I mean, it's not like he was running scout team and he was
out
team.
for a. I mean,
he was out. He was out.
Yes.
So, I mean, as far as experience, he has 1 semester of experience on Jeremiah. That's it. He had that 1 spring, and then he was hurt.
It's
by
funny.
The time he got back on the field, Jeremiah was there.
Right. It's funny because in my weird convoluted mind, I was like, wait, aren't they in the same class? Like that was my complete thought process because they've actually played for Notre Dame the exact same amount of time. I mean, realistically, that's exactly what they've done. Jadarian has a spring semester over him basically, and potentially the starter at that point when he went out. I mean, that's how good he was. But in my brain, I was like, aren't they the same class? And then what was it? We had a conversation about running backs or something, and somebody, and obviously that he's a year ahead of us. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. So yeah, in my mind, they're like the same age.
Right. They're not.
Yeah.
No, Jadarian's a year ahead, but they're both freshman eligibility wise.
Right.
That's the key. And now they got that much needed experience under their belts last year, and I expect them to step up. And they both showed last year they're home run hitters.
Yes. So
that's something that helps you. And here's the other thing you're adding to the equation this year too, Vince, that I did not put in. Well, we're going to move this up a little bit, right? I put it in there, but we're going to move it up. The other thing that gives me confidence that they're going to be able to somewhat outplay their experience issues on the O-line, which we'll get into, is you do have a quarterback now that can be not just a scrambler, but can be a part of the run game. Because again, your numbers are going to be a little inflated this year, in my opinion, run game wise, because they count pass game scrambles as part of that. Right. And so I expect Riley Leonard to have at least a couple hundred yards in scramble yards this year.
Right.
Which is going to raise the numbers. But specifically speaking, you can factor him into the run game. And when you have an inexperienced offensive line, which they do, having a quarterback that can kind of make you right and protect that is huge. So if I'm a team that's playing Notre Dame, say, look, they got a very big and talented offensive line, but they're inexperienced. So we're going to throw a lot at them. We're going to twist and stunt. We're going to come at them. We're talented as well. We're going to load the box, do all these things. Having a quarterback that can kind of be the great equalizer is a huge part of that. It's a huge part of being able to somewhat neutralize or make them pay for the ways in which they're going to attack the offensive line. So those are big things, is like from a ball carrier standpoint, this is as gifted as Notre Dame has been in a very long time. With all due respect to Audric and Logan, or even last year, because, you know, last year you had Audric, Logan, and Jadarian, which was outstanding, but you didn't have that guy at quarterback.
Exactly. This
year, those guys are going to be even better, and you now have a quarterback that 2 years ago ran for 699 yards and 13 touchdowns, right? And not all of that was scrambles. I mean, you go look at the touchdown run he had, and he was on pace for over 800 yards this year before he got hurt. He was on pace for over 800 yards and over 10 touchdowns again. He had almost 100 yards rushing against Clemson. He had almost 100 yards rushing against Northwestern, who was pretty good last year, and he had almost 100 yards rushing against Notre Dame last season. And so that factors in as well, because if you're keying on the two dynamic backs, and now you've got this quarterback that can pull it on a read zone or a power read, or, you know, all types of different scenarios, then you're going to be more successful. I mean, I'll say it right now, even with the inexperienced offensive line, I feel much better about a 4th and 1 against Ohio State this year than I did last year.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. And because you now have that quarterback, this is no disrespect, Sam Hartman. You didn't bring him in here to convert 4th and 1s with his legs, right? Let's be honest. But Riley gets that first down on the sideline because he has more experience in those moments, knowing, hey, I know where the sticks are as a runner. I'm putting my shoulder down and I'm picking that up, right? And he's faster than Sam too, so he might have got there a little faster. That's a big part of it too that gives me confidence, Vince, that they're going to be able to at least be good enough while the offensive line grows and develops to find their success. That's going to be the key.
When I was looking at the our outline and what we were going to talk about today, this line right here is the one that jumped out to me. Because Riley Leonard, yes, he's a mobile quarterback, and you talked in the intro about, or the intro of this part, about how, you know, the Duke game and how there was a scramble in there that kind of inflated the numbers and things like that. Is Riley Leonard going to scramble? Yeah, Riley Leonard's going to scramble because that's who he is, and he has the ability to do so. But he's also going to be part of the offensive game plan in a running capacity. And when you add that to the mix, that's just yet another guy that the defense has to take account of in the run game. That's massive when you're talking about an offensive line that is as inexperienced as Notre Dame's is.
He may not be all the time a factor in the run game. He may not be all the time a guy that is okay, hey, you are coming in here and you're going to be, you know, part of this game. We're going to have these design calls for you. Mm-hmm. You may not go into every game with that, but the other team has to prepare
exactly
that he will.
Yes.
Right? Because he will be at times. Correct. Or it could be you have him as part of that, but you never have to go to it for certain reasons. But that takes away, hey, I'd love to, like last year, how many times, Vince, did you and I watch a backside crash blow the run game up, take Audric Estimate down? But they couldn't. It wasn't part of what they were doing.
I know.
I mean, not that they couldn't. Sam wasn't wrong for not pulling it because that's not what he was asked to do.
Sure.
But this year, you can't crash that hard on the backside.
Correct. And if you do,
right,
go
you've got a
it.
6'4", 220-pound athletic quarterback.
Right.
That runs a 4.5, 4.6 and has over 1,000 career yards, has over 1,000 yards rushing in the last 2 years, despite missing half a season.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So, you know, those are things you look at, Vince, and say, hey, listen, you have to defend Notre Dame differently this season than you did last year.
Correct.
The fact that they have a few more playmakers on the perimeter helps. Mm-hmm. Sure. So those are things that factor in as well, Vince, to this thing that you say, okay, you want to talk about what are the reasons for optimism about the run game this year before we get into some of the areas of concern? It's the dynamic running backs and having a quarterback like Riley Leonard who can be a big part of the actual run game, not just not just scrambles, but right, yeah. Exactly, a part of the run game. So, right. When you look at Duke, for example, and here's another interesting aspect. It's not just so much the yards for Riley that it kind of gets me fired up. It's he did it in a way where he was not like a high volume runner per se. He's a guy that was successful also, Vince, from a yards per carry standpoint. And this you don't see as much. He was at 6.1 yards per carry last year running the football. And he was at 5.6 the year before. That is really good. And so like when you look at Notre Dame's mobile quarterbacks that they've had over the years, Brandon Wimbush, think about how dynamic Brandon Wimbush was as a runner. He was at 5.7. So Riley Leonard is right where Brandon Wimbush is as a runner, but he's a significantly better thrower. Right? Like that's what you're adding to this offense is Brandon Wimbush type of running ability and a much better passer.
Yeah. That's I want to use the term wrinkle. Like it's a huge wrinkle that the defenses have to prepare for, but it's more than that. It's not just a wrinkle, but the more things that a defense has to prepare for, the better off you're going to be as an offense. But the key is as the season progresses, you have to show that you can be successful in all of those different wrinkles at some point or another so that they still remain legitimate as the season goes on. I mean, that because, look, going into to week one, is Mike Elko going to respect Riley Leonard's running ability? Of course he is. He saw it on a regular basis for the last 2 years. Of course he's going to respect it. But then you have to institute that in your game plan here, at least here and there, so that people continue to respect that part of the game plan that you have and all of that. And so I think that's going to be such an important piece of this run game because it only takes one step in the wrong direction by a defensive end who in the past was crashing very hard and now has to respect Riley Leonard for a guy like Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price to hit the hole and take it to the house. I mean, it is that simple. I'm excited to see what this trio of runners can do in this offense. Is it a guarantee that because of these three guys that they're going to have all the success? Of course not. But I would much rather have it this way than, not having one of the three of these guys be part of the run game at Notre Dame.
Yep.
So offensive line, obviously we need to talk about their, inexperience as a whole. Yeah. Obviously they've had some time together, but not a lot. They're not like a 5-man returning starting line from last year. There is some experience there. Obviously they've had at least one game of success. We think the starting lineup will be in August with, in the bowl game. So they're going to have to grow up. I mean, you don't get a pass in game one. That's for sure. You've got a couple of get right games after that.
Sure.
But game one's pretty darn important, Brian.
Sure.
And so you've got to be able to hold your own, hold your water in game one.
It's not even just about the game one being a big game too. You're also facing a defensive line that's very talented.
Just go look at our all-opponent team.
You're getting thrown to the wolves a little bit, right? Right. And look, let's be honest. This O-line is going to be the make or break for this run game this year.
Yeah.
Like how they play is going to be make or break. So there's some things that we can talk about. Will the run game be more geared to the talent of the players? Yeah, I hope so. I hope that Mike Denbrock, I'll say this, I hope Mike Denbrock has a bigger say in what the run game looks like than Joe Rudolph does. Because, look, I like Coach Rudolph, and he's got a good track record, but at the end of the day, I was disappointed that he kind of forced his will in the run game of what he likes and not what his line is good at. They did way too much pin and pull last year, Vince, and they did more and more and more as the year went on. And that's where you'd see some of the lack of success in some of the bigger games because they were playing athletic D lines and they weren't athletic enough on the offensive line to do those things. And that was a concern for me. You didn't have Quentin Nelson and Alex Bars at guard like you did in 2017. You didn't have, Quentin Nelson like you did in 2015 where you could get out on the perimeter and really blow stuff up when you'd run your buck sweeps and your G schemes like you did under Coach Eastan. But he kept trying to force feed it. And like under Coach Eastan, when they would run the buck sweep and the counters and the G scheme stuff, it was a complement to the downhill vertical inside zone push. And whether you want to be duo or inside zone, it's the same type of thing. It's the same type of philosophy from the standpoint of vertically oriented, power to point of attack, get that vertical push. And, like that to me just fit what they did well last year. Mm-hmm. And when that's what they did against Ohio State. A lot of what they did against Ohio State was downhill. We're just going to push them off the ball because Ohio State had an undersized athletic D line. They should have kept that going. I mean, against Clemson in 2022, they ran the same play constantly in that game. Just kept running it over and over and over. Now, they do it different ways.
Sure.
And there was nothing Clemson could do about it because they had some creativity with how they got to it, alignment-wise, with motions and shifts and angles and leverage and all that kind of stuff. But it's like they got too cute last year. Right? They tried to, this is what I do. We do gap scheme stuff. This ain't the Big Ten, brother. You know what I mean? Like, you're facing better athletes than you face in the Big Ten. You don't have that kind of lineman. You don't have that kind of offense. You need to do something a little different. You're not a downhill under center team. And hopefully this year they go back to being the inside zone duo being the bread and butter. And then the other stuff, the gap stuff, is more of a complement to that. Harry Hiestand was a zone guy. But I've pointed this out before, some of the longer runs they had in 2017 were off gap plays. Now, here's just some quick football 101 for you.
Oh, I love it.
Inside zone is essentially where your linemen are blocking a zone. And so you have certain rules. So if I'm a guard or a tackle or a guard and a center next to me, we have certain, and I'm going to make it real basic. So O-line coaches out there, don't get mad at me because I left this, and this out. I'm not doing an O-line clinic here for O-line coaches. I'm trying to do a football 101 here. Essentially, you have covered, uncovered rules as a lineman. If I'm covered, I make a call based on where I'm covered to the guy that I'm working with. So if I have a guy, it's a 3 technique, depending on working, I may be working, I need to know what the tackle is. Is he uncovered or covered? And then we may be working together, or I may be base blocking this based on kind of what's out there. Or I may be working with the center on this one based on the alignment. But we're blocking a zone. I'm responsible for this working. So basically, once you have the calls, so I've got a 1 technique. We're running inside zone to me. So me and the center are now doing a zone block where we stay vertical, get a push, working from him up to, let's say, the backside wheel or the mic. How they're lined up, right? So we're working the zone. It's a vertical push. I had line coach, fast swipe, slow swipe. It's a slow swipe. You're not working for speed. You're working power steps. Get that vertical push, right? And you're blocking a zone. The zone is kind of about the back. The back is going to make reads and kind of have for a different point of insertion. Chip Long used to tell me, and it was kind of funny. He said he had a rule for his running backs. If you don't cut it back, you better get at least 4 yards, or I'm taking you out. So basically, an inside zone is meant to cut back. Where it cuts back depends on how the line blocks. But essentially, you're attacking. So if I'm running inside zone to the right, I'm actually trying to cut back behind the left side of the line, right? So Chip's rule was basically, if you stay front side, you better get at least 4 yards or I'm taking you out. Because it means you made the wrong cut if you didn't, if you got less than 2 yards. Bit hyperbolic, but you get the point that he was trying to emphasize. Duo is more of a stay front side type of run. It's now stay vertical or bounce it out. You can cut back duo. Duo is more about just strong vertical double teams. And then the back has to take care of that play side inside backer, essentially. And for that point of assertion. Gap schemes are exactly what you're talking about. You are trying to create a gap in the defense for your running back. So in the gap scheme, I may have a guy inside of me. I'm blocking down, and somebody else is going to be coming outside of me to try to kick that or seal that to open up a gap. So we're trying to do a down block, cross block, some kind of kick out, something that creates a gap, okay, for vertical insertion. Gap schemes are more designed to hit a hole, right? You're going to hit a hole off this block. So if it's a gap run, I want to try to somewhere be in that A gap. We're trying to create a space in that gap. So that's what a gap scheme is. But a lot of the gap scheme stuff that Notre Dame would do was outside stuff, off tackle to bounce. And they didn't have enough gap stuff that was downhill, like power and counter and stuff like that took advantage of Audrick's skill set. they'd get him outside all the time, which to me was like, okay, I understand what you're trying to do, but does that really fit your skill set? And then they'd bring Jeremiah Love in the game and run him in the A gap. It didn't make any sense.
Right.
Like with Tommy the year before, Tommy's mistake, my opinion, was they were just a downhill run team. That's who they were.
It was duo.
When he would bring in, and that was okay with Audric and Logan, cool with that.
Yeah.
Like I remember when Chip Long got hired, one of the things I broke some film. I said one of the most impressive drives I ever saw from him is they ran their G scheme, which is a gap play against. I'm trying to remember who it was against. I think it might have been SMU, somebody like that. But he ran the same play 8 straight times, just depending on left or right, because they were in an alignment where they couldn't stop it and they never adjusted. So Chip was like, I'm going to keep running this until you adjust and stop it. And he went right down the field for a touchdown. Literally ran the same play. I think there was one play in that series where they ran something different and they went right back to it. Like, that's how I roll. Like, look, I'm going to keep running this. You know what I mean? Like,
Bryan, I was offensive coordinator on one of the last teams that I was working with, and we run a trap play, which is a gap scheme. And it was working really well. We were getting 8 or 9 yards of carry, and I kept calling it over and over. And finally, my head coach gets on the headset. He's like, "Are you going to call something different?" I said, "No, because they're not stopping it. Why would I call something different? We the last play we got 11, last play we got 9, last play we got 14. Like, why would I stop calling this play?" I said, "Once they adjust, we'll call something different." You know, he's like, "But we're calling the same." Yeah, we are. Come talk to me when we punch it in the end zone, which we did. And he's like, "Okay, I get it. I won't bother you anymore." I'm like, "All right, good. Let's keep rolling." You know, football doesn't have to be complicated, Bryan. That's where a lot of offensive coordinators, I know I'm going off on a tangent here a little bit. That's where a lot of offensive coordinators get in trouble because they feel like they got to be the smartest guy in the room and you got to, impress people with your play calling. Dude, call what works, man.
One of the best O-line coaches I've ever studied in my life, obviously Coach Easton, but I'm talking about like ever. Like on all levels. Another one was Alex Gibbs for the Broncos. I mean, the Broncos really ran 2 plays. Those great years they won Super Bowls. They ran inside and outside zone. Now, they ran it a ton of different ways, and that's where the creativity should get from. I was like, dude, we're an inside-outside zone team. That's it. Because the thing about the beauty of zone is no matter how you line up, I got an answer for it. Mm-hmm. Because of the rules that we implement.
Correct.
And that's one of the things I love about it. That's one of the things I've come to really appreciate about duo is duo is a lot closer to inside zone than it is the power concept. I mean, it's I don't even know how to explain. Like, I don't know what it would fit in, but it to me, it complements zone perfectly. Having said all that, when you look at this offensive line, if you think about, well, what can they be? Early on, you have to, like, here's what I don't want to do. I don't want to have this complex run game early on that this young, inexperienced offensive line can execute, and then you bitch about the fact that they're just too inexperienced.
Right. Like,
that's my biggest fear, right? That's my biggest fear right now about this team is, we're trying to run all these gap schemes, all this other kind of stuff, and we just, we made too many mistakes. Why'd you do that? You've got a 6'7", 330-pound left tackle, right? You've got a right guard that's 6'4", 315, athletic, powerful. You're going to have a talented center. You're going to have a veteran, strong kid at left guard. Who I don't know if they're going to have a right tackle, but if it's Emil Wagner, you're going to have a very athletic, powerful kid there. If it's Gerby Lambert, you're going to have a huge, powerful, athletic kid there, right? Why are you trying to outsmart Texas Tech, right? You got elite backs. Give your kids, here's what we're doing. Now you can get creative against Texas Tech with the motions, the shifts, the tight end alignments, the overloads, and all the things that have nothing to do with the offensive line. Right? That's the brilliance of what Coach Easton and Coach Reese did against Clemson 2 years ago. For the offensive line, it was like, you don't have a lot of responsibilities, guys. The beauty of what they did in that game, Vince, was how they used the offensive line and how they used the tight ends and the motions to create leverage advantages and numbers advantages when they would bounce. So they'd have Audric or Logan bouncing outside, and you got Jaden Thomas coming from the backside, leading them outside. And so that's where it needs to be creative, is be creative with your read zone concepts, your RPOs off of it, with your formations, your alignments, your motions, your shifts. Be creative there. Run inside zone, outside zone, duo, and one misdirection play against Texas A&M. That's all you need, really. in that game. So that way they don't have a lot to think about. We got our zone rules, we got our zone rules, we got our zone rules, we got our zone rules. Right? And then just go let them be talented. Because, again, you chose to go this route of being inexperienced. And I'm okay. I'm cool with that. But I don't want to hear you say, well, we're too inexperienced to be, and that's why we're making mistakes. You're inexperienced. So put less on them early and get really good at the basics. And that's what I liked about when you'd watch Coach Heastan with his young offensive line. I was like, guys, they would do the same thing in practice every single day. Zone, right? Zone footwork, right? Double teams, vertical push, same thing every single day. And then they got good at that. Then they'd add some more to it and get to that point. And that's what I'm hoping they do with this group. Because here's the thing, Vince, you've got this really huge contrast on one side of the aisle. You've got a very, very talented offensive line, just physical talent. On the other side, you're going to have, if Pat Coogan starts, you're going to have 13, 16, 19, 20, 23 career starts in your starting offensive line. If Emil Wagner wins the right tackle job and Rocco wins the left tackle job, you're going to have 17 career starts in the offensive line. That's not a lot. You had 3 offensive linemen last year that had more than that themselves. Right? So that's the thing. So if you ask too much of them and they can't execute what you're asking them to do, that's a coaching problem, not a player problem.
True. That is a good point.
You can't blame the players for not having experience. They can't force feed themselves experience. They can't put a virtual reality thing on and all of a sudden they're more experienced because they had 1 million virtual reality reps over the summer. That's not how it works. Right? So what are you going to do with your offensive line to say, we're going to use the talent. We're going to focus on fundamentals. We're going to focus on technique. We're going to focus on toughness, being physical, mindset stuff. And then as they get more experience, then we can add some more wrinkles schematically what we do. Yeah. When you've got the quarterback you have now, it takes away some of your need to get cute to get the ball outside. You don't need to do that. You want to get the ball outside? Okay, run inside zone and freaking RPO off of it. You want to get the ball outside? Run inside zone with a read pull. That guy comes down, you're out the gate. It's not that complicated. It's not that complicated. And, I mean, I'd watch LSU last year run inside zone 15 straight runs. Not straight plays, but runs. And it would – sometimes it's a give, sometimes it's a pull from the quarterback. Sometimes it's an RPO where he's pulling and throwing, and sometimes it's that little screen they do. So they do so much cross blocking. Cross block is where you have your tight end front side and he comes back. And so because you gotta secure that backside gap in zone. If you're just calling a pure inside zone with no read, you've got to secure that backside gap outside the tackle. So to get there, Vince, you can either line a tight end up backside, right? You can run a read where the quarterback secures that backside with his pull.
Right.
You can bring a tight end or someone from the front side to block back, whether it be a tight end or a receiver, something like that. Some teams will get creative. There'll be like a smoke with a slot receiver going back, and if they don't respect it, you can kind of pull it and throw it or do a lot of things. Remember back in the day, like when zone really became the read zone really became popular back in like the 2000s with like Rich Rod at Clemson and stuff like that. They would have like 4 receivers, and they'd have that one slot guy kind of peel back, and it's almost like a spread out triple option. You remember that, Vince, back in the day? Teams don't do as much of that anymore, but the point is you have to occupy that backside. So one thing that Denbrock did real effectively last year is they would do all those cross blocks where because their tight end was a sophomore and he wasn't a real physical, strong guy. So they were going to just line him up and say, block the C gap and root that guy out and all. They would kind of get him some motion going, some leverage going. So he would go backside. And so that allows him to kind of, get a running start a little bit on blocking that. And then because teams had to kind of be a little bit patient backside because you had Jaden Daniels, then it would allow him to be successful. So what they would do is they would then bring him back like he's going to do a cross block and then just have him keep right on going outside. And if that tight end squeezed down, Jaden Daniels would pull it, and he'd basically have a run-throw option. Now, he'd get outside, and if he has leverage, he'd just dump it off to the tight end, and he'd go. And if the linebacker flew out with him, Jaden would tuck it right up vertical and get a big play. And
you'll see that play this year. You'll see
better.
That play. You'll
they
see
flipping
that play.
better.
100%. Because everybody that you just mentioned is a playmaker at Notre Dame.
But here's the thing. For the offensive line, nothing changes.
Right, absolutely.
If I'm just running pure inside zone read, if I'm running inside zone with split zone, right? If I'm running, cross block or, split zone, they call it split zone when the tight end comes front side and goes backside. Whether I'm running it with a smoke backside, whether I'm running with an RPO, whether I'm running it with the RPO pull, drop back, none of it changes. Nothing changes for the offensive line. Whether I'm doing it with a loaded backside, whether I'm doing it with a loaded backside or loaded front side where I bring backside, whether there's all what I mean by that is I can go 2 tight ends to the right and run inside zone to the left, and my backside is secure. I mean, we are power blocking that backside. I could also go 2 backs to the right and run inside zone to the right and bring my wing backside to secure that gap. And now it's almost like I'm running it out of ace, which is, tight end on both sides. Those are all different looks. And so there's a lot of different things you can do out of that, but all of it's the exact same thing for the line. And if you're going into games with 7, 8 different concepts and a bunch of pin and pulls with this young offensive line, and they don't play well, there's one person to blame or 2 people to blame. It's the OC and the O-line coach, because you should not have done that. Now, by game 8, maybe you can add more of those wrinkles in there.
Sure.
Right? But at the end of the day, it's give them they have to master the basics first. And if you go beyond the basics before they've got it down, that's on you. You got to let the talent take over. It's got to be about talent, technique, and toughness. That's what's got to be about for this offensive line this year. Talent, technique, and toughness. Actually, you should say toughness, talent, technique. That's what it needs to be. Right? Let's put them in the proper order, right, Vince? Mm-hmm. Toughness, the most important trait for an offensive line.
100%.
Talent. Actually, here's the proper way of toughness, technique, talent.
Agreed. I was going to flip you. So good. I'm glad you did it.
That's good. Yes.
I'm glad you did it.
That's the focus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. If you're trying to out-scheme your opponents early on, that's a you problem. Out-scheme them in the pass game. Right. Out-scheme them with your RPO game. Out-scheme them because of how you use your quarterback to protect those edges and keep teams from loading the box. That's all fine. But make it simple for the O-line. Because if you can find a way, here's what it comes down to, Vince. All of that to say this. If you can somehow find a way to neutralize your biggest weakness on your team, your biggest weakness, offense, defense, special teams, all of it, your biggest weakness right now is your lack of experience at the position where experience matters more than any other position, offensive line. The more you can find ways to neutralize that weakness as best you can, the better you're going to be. And if they can find ways to neutralize that, you've got a dynamic quarterback. You've got 2 dynamic running backs that are returners and 2 freshmen that could start for a lot of Notre Dame teams over the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you can't get the O-line going, that's on you. That's on you, in my opinion, honestly.
Yep.
And so it excites me.
Yeah.
Right? Because the talent is there, but it also concerns me because it's going to require shift in attitude from what we saw last year. Because they went into last year with 2 guards that were juniors that had 22 career snaps. And they were asking those guys to pin and pull who aren't athletic at all. And they were asking them to pin and pull all game. Right? Like, you don't got to be an elite athlete to be a pin and pull guy.
Right.
At times. I mean, Steve Elmer wasn't an elite athlete. And heck, you remember the 74-yard run they had against North Carolina in 2017? Remember, Alex Bars got knocked out of that game. That was Hunter Biven on that play. He wasn't an elite athlete. But it was a wrinkle, so he didn't have to be. He got out there, did his job, and Josh cut it back for a 74-yard touchdown. Right? Like, so if you're doing it as a wrinkle, that's okay. Few here, few there. I'm not saying you can only run inside zone every single play. You guys understand that, right? But it's got to be your bread and butter. I mean, there were games in 2017, Vince, where they would run inside zone over 90% of the time. 90% of the time. And you know why they kept doing it? Because they couldn't stop it.
Exactly.
Right? But it allowed the O-line to play vertical. They could focus on their technique. They could go out there and push and punish. And they had a redshirt freshman and a true freshman playing at right tackle. So you know what they did? Let's not ask him to do a lot. And that's what worked for him. Right? Now, you got to have some other things going for you as an offense. If you can't throw the football, You're going to have what happened against Georgia and Miami. Right? They could just load the box. And look, I don't care how good you are on the O-line. If I've got 5, 6 blockers and you've got 8 guys defending the run, I'm going to lose that battle a lot when you're good, right? Miami and Temple tried to put 8 in the box. Didn't matter because they didn't have Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey and, and Alex Bars and Sam Musfer type of players. When you're playing Georgia, they do have that kind of talent. When you were playing Miami had like 4 NFL defensive linemen that year. So you got to be able to protect it. And so that's a different story for a different day. But for this, what do I always say? Control the controllables, right? What you can control as the O-line coach is my kids are going to be tough. They're going to have great technique, and they're going to be, and I've got talent, right? I can't control the experience. I can't wave a magic wand and give them 50 to 60 more career starts. I can't do that. But I can make them tough as hell, and I can make sure every day we focus on doing it the right way every single drill.
Right.
I had a kid tell me a story about how they showed up at a something they were going to do, and the kid had the wrong jacket. Coach Eastham made him go back to his dorm and get the new one. Because his thing was, we're going to do the right thing in everything we do. You don't bring a pencil to a meeting, go get one. And you're late because you didn't bring the pencil. Just little things like that. You have to harp on these kids when the day they get there.
100%.
And if you do that and you let the talent take over, I think this offensive line could be very good. But I don't want to hear any excuses this year about, we're not experienced enough. You chose to be inexperienced. That's on you, right? You chose to not bring Zeke Correll back. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that's a choice.
Sure.
You chose not to go to the portal for a more veteran player. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that's a choice. So this is who you are. Right. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do with it? And if they do the right thing, I think they're going to be very good. Now, will they be very good right away? No. Just do your job against A&M, right? Just get through that game. I don't care how ugly that win is. Get the dub.
Sure. Yeah.
Because as you said at the beginning, Vince, you got some get-right games coming up next.
Yep.
Right? No offense to Miami. Northern Illinois is going to be okay. Miami of Ohio's got a kid that I had on my second-team all-opponent team on defensive end. He had 64 pressures last year, right?
100%.
Like, they're not going to be bums, but that's when your talent kind of carries the day in that one, right? But you've got to get to that opener. And so the more that it's about toughness, technique, then the talent shines. If you try to get too cute and show everyone the world how smart I am run game scheme-wise, then you're going to get yourself beat.
Yeah.
You're going to lose a game this year that shouldn't lose. That's what it comes down to. Because if this part of the line can get going, if this part of the team rolls, I don't know how you beat this football team. They should have a championship caliber defense again. Mm-hmm. They've got the best. I was just talking to somebody, actually texting during the show. I was like, this is the most skill talent Notre Dame's had in a long time. Mm-hmm. Quarterback, running back, receiver. As long as this position group right here doesn't kind of be the neutralizer, right? Brings that group down, then they should be good, right? It's kind of the opposite of where they were in 2017, right? In 2017, they had a great offensive line.
And you knew they were going to have a great
offensive line. But you had really shaky quarterback situation, really shaky at receiver. You're trying to win with Cameron Smith and Freddie Canteen and Chris Fink again. I mean, think about that. These knuckleheads said, we'll leave Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool on the bench against Georgia. Let's roll out Cam Smith and Freddie Canteen and Chris Fink and see how it goes. It's like, okay, it went exactly how you'd think it was going to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And, so they could kind of neutralize the run game. This year, it's the opposite. You are good out there. You are good. You have over 3,000 career yards coming back in receiving yards from last season, right? You've got 2 dynamic, explosive running backs, and you've got one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country. The only thing that can slow this offense down is up front. And the only thing that can slow that offensive line down is you don't do what you need to do to let the talent take over. So, man, I'm telling you, man, I'm excited about what this group can be, but I also, every time I rewatch last year's film, I get a little bit nervous because I'm like, they didn't show me Coach Rudolph, who has a great track record, did not show me that he has a good feel for here's what the talent should dictate we do. We're going to do it. Now, the question is, will Mike Denbrock allow him to have a strong say in that as Jared Parker allowed him to do? That's going to be the big question.
Sure.
Right? How's that going to go?
Right.
Mike Denbrock is like, hey, coach, I love your ideas. That's all beautiful stuff. But we're going to run inside zone.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Like That's going to be the emphasis.
Right.
And Coach Denbrock's got to make sure he sets that. Hey, guys, because look, Coach Denbrock used to coach the O-line. Remember that. He was a tackles tight ends coach. And for a few years, he worked with this guy. What was that guy's name at Notre Dame? Well, who was his O-line coach at Notre Dame? Oh, what was that guy's name? Oh, yeah, Harry Heastan. Right? So, like, he knows this is what it should look like. His O-line coach at LSU was pretty good, to be honest with you. I mean, they got one of the best O-lines in the country coming back from this past year. So that's what gives me kind of hope, where Jared Parker was a young guy that honestly did not have the confidence in himself to say, this is my room. Guys, I love your ideas. I want to respect your ideas, but we're going to do it this way. And that's what a great OC has to do is like, hey, guys, this is how we're going to do certain things. Now, within that, I want to hear your ideas. I want to do this. If you have something, come to me, but this is kind of who we're going to be, and let's work within that. And then you take the input, because you always want to value other coaches. You always want to do that, right? But when you do those type of things with a new OC who it's almost like when you talk politics and a guy barely wins, like, well, he doesn't really have a mandate to do all these things. Well, that's kind of what Jared Parker went through because of the way that the whole thing went, because they weren't just going to bring in Andy Ludwig. They were trying to bring in Andy Ludwig and his O-line coach, who's pretty good.
Yeah.
And then that whole debacle just kind of, and then Jared Parker came in and, hey, I got all these former OCs around me and all that. And it's like, okay, that's all great, but you got to be the man in the room. You've got to be the one that says, this is what we're going to do. Now go do it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I'm hoping that they're going to get out of Mike Denbrock is that, and this is no shot at Jared Parker. I have a great deal of respect for I like Jared Parker. He was in a tough situation, and Mike Denbrock's going to walk in there and he's going to command that room in a whole different way. It's like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. But hey, I just had the number one offense in the country last year, so we're going to go ahead and do it my way. Now, he would never say that because Mike's a good guy. Coach Denbrock's a good guy. He would never, but you get the point that I'm making, though, right? Like, he 100%. Commands that respect when he walks in.
Yes.
And he got young backs and a young O-line.
Right.
Don't make it too complicated. Let the talent take over.
And here's the other thing about the relationship between Mike Denbrock and Marcus Freeman, right? I mean, they've done this before. They've worked together before. Marcus Freeman has empirical evidence right in front of his face of what Mike Denbrock can do and how he operates. And he wouldn't have brought him in if he didn't already appreciate and respect that relationship. And so I'm not saying he didn't respect Jared Parker. Jared Parker was his choice. Like, he chose Jared Parker to be the offensive coordinator at the end of the day. He went out and got Mike Denbrock to make sure he was on the team. And so I feel like that dynamic is already in play, and I don't think it's going to be like the dynamic that was there last year. I think it's going to be different. I really do. Not. I have a hard time seeing Marcus Freeman be like, nope, this is my team now. Like, this is how, like, I don't know. I just have a hard time seeing that. I have a feeling.
No, I mean, Mike Denbrock doesn't take the job if that's the case. I mean, look, guys, the reality is Marcus Freeman wasn't happy with how the offense went last year.
Yeah.
Now, again, that's on him. He's the one that put those things in place to get there, right? And that was the mistake. Every coach makes mistakes. Every coach makes mistakes with starting lineups. Every coach says, hey, look, I started this guy. That was a mistake. Like 2014, remember that? Like, Coach Heastan went with an offensive line in 2014. It wasn't working out. So what did he do as the season went on? He made changes. Yeah. Nick Martin had a hand issue, so they put him out to guard. They moved Matt Hegarty to center. They flipped Elmer, and because I think they started, I could be incorrect, but I think they started like Elmer at tackle and then Christian Lombard at guard, and they flipped them. And then by the end of the year, the O-line was rolling, right? So you always get these situations where, like, hey, look, we thought this was going to go a certain way. For whatever reason, it didn't quite go that way. I mean, how can I anticipate that Nick Martin's going to have a busted up hand, right? So, I can either complain and cry all year about he's got a hand, he can't do this, or I'm going to do something different. Let's put Matt Hegarty in there and move Nick out to guard where he doesn't, so there's all those types of things where we say, hey, look, I made a bad hire. Urban Meyer did that. He went out and put Ed Warner and Tim Beck as his OC in 2016. The offense took a hit back. 1 year, took 1 year, and he's like, see ya. And he brings in Tom Herman, and the offense takes off. Right. I mean, that's what good coaches do. Nick Saban's made bad hires. Dabo Swinney's made bad hires.
Made bad hires.
Right. Or not even bad hires, but they just weren't as good as they needed to be for us to compete for a championship.
Sure.
You make those changes. Well, that's what Mike Denbrock is. And now Mike Denbrock has got to say, hey, look, you've got to command the respect of your coaches. And coaches want to know that they're valued. They want to know that their opinions are valued. And you should do that. That's respect. But there also has to be, I respect your opinions, but I need to know what your opinions are within what we're doing.
Right.
Okay, great. I know you love pin and pull, and I know you did that a million times at Wisconsin. That's fine. We're going to be an inside zone team.
That's right. We're here.
So give me these ideas. How are we going to make this work? Because this is what we're going to do. And so I think we're going to run duo. We're going to do those type of things, and then make it work that way. I want to hear your ideas in that regard, because that's how it needs to be done, in my opinion. And if they do that and the talent takes over, then I think they'll be fine. They'll have look, they're going to have some ups and downs when you're this young. Because I've always said, I don't care if a guy's inexperienced at running back. I don't care if they're inexperienced at receiver. I care about inexperienced quarterbacks, and I really care about inexperienced offensive linemen.
Sure.
The good news is we at least saw this group together to some degree, and they performed well. But one game together does not mean that they're going to consistently be a really good offensive line.
Correct.
You don't have a month to prepare for every game like they did the bowl game.
Fair.
Right? Half your defense isn't sitting out like it was for the bowl game. And the other part of it too, Vince, as we said, there's a whole lot difference between being the guy come off the bench and now you're the guy.
Exactly. We've talked about that a bunch.
Right? Whole different level of expectation. Correct. So there's encouragement based on what they did late in the year.
Right.
And you know what they did late in the year too? If you go watch the bowl game, I didn't see a ton of this. I saw a lot of this with Geno running the offense. A lot of this. And it worked. Right? I mean, they popped a couple late, but they were getting those chunks that allowed them to move the ball early. And that's going to be the key. Because again, if the attitude is right and the technique is taught, then again, the talent will take over eventually. But there will be ups and downs, guys. I'm just preparing you right now. When you have a line this young, there's going to be some ups and there's going to be some games where they weren't that good that game. Right? And that's going to be the key. That's me. Rita's.
Okay. I didn't know if it was outside my door.
Rita was napping, and now she's up moving around, and that's
all good.
Dog so,
no, it's all good. That's like, do I need to mute? Okay.
No, I'm going to have the girls down here with me for the next couple days.
Oh, for sure.
Until Angela gets back. And Sadie gets her stitches out on Monday. And once she gets her stitches out, that's why I got to have her with me, because I got to make sure she's not trying to get them out on her own.
100%. So
that's me. My bad. So anyway, Vince, we've kind of beat this horse to death.
Yeah.
Right? But the reason is because this is the most important thing that we're going to talk about this offseason, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Is this topic right here. How does the O-line get developed, and how do they perform in the run game, especially in the biggest moments?
Right.
Because I don't think you're going to I've had this debate with people in the past. So Harry Heastand didn't coach well in big games. I'm like, that's false. Because to you, the only Lou Samoji had the greatest comment ever. We did a show together, and he's like, the problem with some Notre Dame fans is the only big games, the ones they lose.
Correct.
So they ignore the fact that, they ran for over 300 yards against USC in 2017, top 10 team, and they focus on what happened against Georgia. They ignore the fact that they ran for 182 yards against the number 2 run defense in the country in Michigan State, a team that won 10 games. And by the second half, they were down to their 5th running back while doing that. Remember that? Because Tony Jones is already hurt. He got hurt the week before against BC. Josh got knocked out at halftime. Dex comes in the third quarter. He goes down, and it's 4th running back. And then they got Deion McIntosh in the 4th quarter. Ball.
That's right. Deion McIntosh.
Michigan State fans leaving in the 3rd quarter. Still didn't matter. And but why? Because it's like you that was a big game. The problem that hurt them in some of those moments is Miami basically said, you're not going to run on us. You're going to have to beat us throwing the football. Georgia said, you're not going to run on us. I've always said this, Vince. A really good defense can stop a really good run offense if that's all you can do. They can. Georgia can shut down the best. You could take an all-star team of Notre Dame offensive linemen in the last 10 years, put them together, and if you can't throw the ball, a team like Georgia, Bama will stop your run game. At least keep it in check. You've got to beat them throwing the ball. That's what I've said for a million times. If Brandon Wimbush hits EQ on that post route on drive 1, that game is a rout, the opposite direction of what it turned out to be.
Yeah.
Same thing against Clemson. If people say, well, Notre Dame couldn't run the ball on Clemson in 2018. Go watch the game again. Notre Dame was efficient, I think, on 7 of their first 11 runs in that game. The first play of the game, they took the Clemson D-line and remember that? The big pile that just kept moving forward for like an 11-yard gain, first play of the game. What happened was when Ian refused to throw that post to Miles and he was open, Clemson said, this cat ain't going to throw the ball down the field. And they loaded the box. And I don't care who you are, when a team like Clemson with 5 or 6 high draft picks in their front 7, they're going to stop you from running the ball. This team, I think, has the ability to hurt teams that do that, in my opinion. But the opposite is true. If you know you can just whoop these guys with your box and you don't need to put guys in the box because your O-line's not handling business, then now that's the opposite thing happens. Now they can put more guys into zone coverage, more guys playing over top of this and hurt the pass game. That's why I say there's nothing more impactful than this group playing well. When in games where this O-line plays well, Notre Dame will look like a playoff deep run team. They will. When they don't play well, they're going to look like a flawed team that can't win at all. They might be able to get to the playoff, but they're not going to be able to make a run. This is the unit that's going to determine that. And, that's where it's at. I got fired up today, man. That was kind of a rant.
We talked about the definition of a rant earlier today.
Is that a technical rant? Would that be called a technical rant?
Yeah. You're in the neighborhood. You're knocking on the door. But no, you're absolutely right. And I'm excited to see how this offensive line plays. And I think at the end of the day, they're going to surprise some people because there's plenty of people out there that think because of the inexperience of this offensive line, they're just going to be terrible. That Notre Dame just hasn't recruited offensive line well. And because there's no starts under their belt for some of these guys, that it's I shouldn't say no, limited starts under the belt for some of these guys, that they're not going to be any good. You can't be good unless you have 20 starts under your belt. And I think that there's going to be some people that are going to be surprised in a good way. And I'm looking forward to watching that. I really am. I really, really, because there's a lot of talent on this offensive line and they can figure out how to play well together. Then it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. So that's going to do it for this portion of the podcast. Make sure you hit the like button, that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share with your family and friends. Jump on the boards at irishbreakdown.com. As I mentioned earlier, there's some good conversation going on over there. And of course, there's always breaking news and intel. And if you're not part of the boards, you just don't know. And you're late. Like the one guy who was in the chat asking questions, and it was like, well, if you were on the board, you would have known this 48 hours ago. Just saying.
Which of my last night show?
Yeah. So I thought that was really funny. I think I laughed in the middle of the show at that one.
Because I had jumped in the chat.
Right.
He was like, what's going on? I was like, well, if you were on the board, you'd have known this yesterday.
It was great. It was fantastic. So make sure you're a member of the board. It's money well spent, and you will not regret it. All right. It's time for part 3 of today's podcast. It is Thursday, so that means it is time for a conference preview, and we got the good old Southeastern Conference to talk about today.
SEC.
It's just different in the SEC.
Just different. It just matters more.
Different. It just it matters more. That's what it is. That's
so dumb.
That's great. So we broke down the ACC a few weeks ago, and we broke down the Big Ten most recently, and so today is the SEC.
And our champs were Ohio State, Oregon.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
And then Clemson, Florida State.
We've been different. Yeah, we've been different.
We've had teams in the title game both times, and that'll continue today.
Yes, it will.
But we had different champs. I think that's going to change a little bit today.
I think that does change today, unless you can somehow change my mind midstream, which has never
happened since before. I agree with you, I'm not going to try and change your mind.
Yeah, good point.
You're only ever wrong when you disagree with me. We've established this, right? So.
Yes. It's been well established. It's written in stone.
I got to say that to you because I don't ever get to say that to my wife. So I got to take advantage of it.
Believe me,
I can. Yeah.
We didn't hit 20 years on, anyway. All right. So we are going to do the same thing that we've done on the last 2 conference breakdowns. We're going to let you know what we think the order of finish is going to be. And then we are going to talk about, who's going to be in the title game, who wins, how many teams and who do we think are going to make the playoff, who, coaches on the hot seat, overrated teams, underrated teams, who we think might be the MVP. And so lots of stuff to cover and to get to in the SEC. And so to start it off, let's just talk about where we think these teams are going to place when it's all said and done. And there is definitely some haves and have-nots. There always are in every conference.
Well, can I just say this real quick, Vince, about this? You are correct. The bottom of this SEC is going to struggle like mightily.
Yes, it will.
But I actually think I have argued a lot recently that I felt that the SEC was very overrated, and they're always great at the top,
Sure,
right?
Absolutely.
But the question was, okay, but will they be able to handle, like past the top 2 or 3? They weren't as good, and that's why those teams kind of dominated the way that they did, because there just was nobody that could even sniff them. I'm looking at it this year, Vince, and I think there's 4 teams that can conceivably win the conference. And then there's another 5, 6, 7 teams that I think could be really good that are going to have records that are worse than what they should be because of how good the league is. And it's a very, very deep league. It's this year, the SEC is what people always say it is, but it rarely isn't. Right? Like that's what the SEC is going to be this year. It's actually going to be as good as people always think that it is.
Sure.
Right?
But that's going to hurt them, I think, to a degree, though, too.
It could. And some of the teams they did no favors for schedule-wise.
Look, we're going to get into that. We're definitely going to get into that, because some of those teams fall in my underrated category. And people, even at the end of the year, people are like, really? You thought they were underrated? It's like, yeah, I think they were underrated. Their schedule may not. I mean, their record.
If I'm Sam Pittman, I was like, why do you hate me?
Yeah.
Why do you guys hate me? Why do you guys want me to get fired? Because like I did some things to get this thing turned around, and then this is the schedule you give me? Really?
Right. Exactly.
Seriously?
Exactly.
So yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna do my standings first. I'll go bottom to top. I'm gonna start at the bottom. I'm gonna work my way up. So if you're writing these things down, go ahead and get your pens and papers ready, folks. The test begins now. Number 16, Vanderbilt. Number 15, Mississippi State. Number 14, Arkansas. Number 13, South Carolina Gamecocks. Number 12, Florida. Number 11, Kentucky. Number 10, Auburn. Number 9, the Aggies of Texas A&M. Number 8, Oklahoma. Number 7, LSU. Number 6, the Volunteers of Tennessee. Number 5, Missouri. Number 4, Ole Miss. Number 3, Alabama. And my championship game will pit number 2, Georgia, against number 1, Texas.
So this is probably the closest we've been so far, Vince.
Yeah, I agree.
I flipped Arkansas and South Carolina. It's not a big difference. I flipped. You had Kentucky 11 and Auburn 10, correct?
Yes. Yep.
I had that flipped.
Okay.
The only you had Missouri, you had Oklahoma 8. I had them 9. The only difference that we had is basically Texas A&M and Missouri. Essentially, they're all but flipped.
Okay.
Right? Like you have Missouri 5th. I have them 8th. You have Texas A&M 9th. I have them 6th.
Okay.
And a lot of it has to do with the schedule, right? Because I actually went through and do the detailed, they're going to win this one. That means that team's going to lose that one.
That's fair.
There's some head-to-head wins that could result in those flips as well. So, and then the top 4 we have in the exact, you said, and then I had Tennessee 5. You had them 6, I think, right? Or 7?
I did. I have them 6.
Okay. LSU, you had,
7.
Where'd you have 7? I had them 7 as well. So those are all very close.
Yeah, the biggest one.
You had Ole Miss 4,
A&M.
Bama 3, Georgia 2, Texas 1, right?
Correct.
For me, the reason that I have Texas 1, and I'm curious if this is the reason I looked at the schedule and I just think their path to being the regular season champ is easier.
Agreed.
When you look at Texas' schedule, Vince, I just think it's set up better for them to make a run to a league championship. I mean, the fact that I even have Georgia where I have them is a testament to how good that football team is going to be. Because
their schedule is brutal.
Nuts. So Texas this year gets Georgia at home. And they get Oklahoma on a neutral field. They do play at A&M at the end of the year. I actually have A&M. I actually have Texas undefeated going into the last game of the year, and I have them losing to A&M.
Oh wow!
Actually,
and that's why A&M is a little higher on your list.
Exactly.
Because that one win would vault them over the teams that I have in between.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So when you look at Texas, their non-conference is tougher. They have UTSA. I mean, they should roll them, but that's a good team. And then they play at Michigan. That doesn't have anything to do with the conference standings.
Yeah.
They play Georgia at home, Oklahoma on a neutral field. They don't play LSU. So I'm going down my standings,
right.
Vince. So Texas has to play number 2 Georgia, right? They don't play 3 Bama. They don't play 4 Ole Miss. They don't play 5 A&M. They do play number 6 or they do not play number 5 Tennessee. They do play at number 6 Texas A&M, and then they don't play number 7 LSU. They don't play number 8 Missouri. So if you look at the top 8 teams in the league, in our perception, Texas is one of them. They only play 2 of the others. So their schedule is much, much easier. Then you look at Georgia. They play number 1 Texas on the road. They play number 3 Alabama on the road. They play number 4 Ole Miss on the road. They don't play 5 Tennessee. They don't play 6 Texas A&M. They don't play 7 LSU, and they don't play 8 Missouri. So they get like a break there, but they play the number 1, 3, and 4 teams in the league. They're the only other top 4 team.
Yeah.
So every top 4 team outside of themselves, they play this year and play them on the road. Like, that's a much tougher schedule. And then you look at Alabama. Bama has to play Georgia this year. They also have to play at number 7 LSU. They have to play at number 9 Oklahoma, who could have higher. They have to play Missouri, who you have number 5. They have to play at number 5 Tennessee, who I have number 5. You have them number 6. So the schedule is just, to me, more challenging.
Yeah. And
so the reason I have Texas number 1 is just because I think they're going to be a very good football team, but the path to get there is just easier.
Absolutely. And the big head-to-head matchup between Georgia and Texas, I have Texas winning because it's not the one game, but it's pretty much close to the one game that they have to get up for, and they get to host it. Right. And so I feel like they've got a decent shot of winning that game, and I have them winning that game.
Yeah. I mean, I would kind of push back on that a little bit. I think that when you look at Texas's schedule, like, don't they play like Oklahoma the game before?
They do.
And then they play at Michigan, but the at Michigan is like over a month before that.
It's way early on in the season.
Right.
So they have 2 games. I will grant you your premise. They have 2 games that they need to get up for, but there's no way they look past Oklahoma,
right?
To Georgia.
And if they beat Oklahoma, they're going to be a very confident team.
And they're going to not look past Georgia, obviously. Yeah. So that 2-game stretch is obviously what hinges their SEC season, which I totally get. But I feel like the way their schedule sets up, it sets up nicely to be successful in those 2 games because you're going neutral field and hosting those 2 games. So you're not even on the road for either one of them. So I like Texas's chances in the regular season in those games.
When you look at the rest of the standings, Vince, with A&M, for me, again, part of it is schedule. I have A&M going 8-4, but I only have them losing 3 conference games. And again, big part of that is schedule.
And that win against Texas is massive for them.
When they get them at home.
Yeah.
Right. And they have a stretch there that here, a couple things. Obviously, they played Notre Dame at home. They play Texas at home, number 1 Texas at home. They don't play number 2 Georgia. They don't play number 3 Alabama. They don't play number 4 Ole Miss. They don't play number 5 Tennessee. Right? So, like, this isn't a list of, okay, here's how I rank the teams 1 to 16. There's the practical aspect of, I like this team better than that team, but this team's schedule is way harder than that team's schedule. And we had this conversation with Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, to me, is a team that I think is better than where I have them ranked in the ACC. To me, just looking at their roster, they're better than that, but their schedule is way harder than the 3 or 4 teams above them. That's when you have a big league like this is one of the disadvantages of a big league. You're going to have way more disparity in schedule strength. Where in the past, back when the SEC was a 7, 8, 9, 10 league, you knew the strength schedule was the same for everybody because you had to play everybody. Mm-hmm. When the Big Ten was a 10-team league, that was the same thing. You had to play everybody in the league. You knew what your schedule was. When you're in the Big 8, everybody had the same. Now, you could argue, okay, ours was a little bit tougher because we had the top 2 teams on the road, but we still had to play the same teams.
Exactly.
Now it's like you got one. Georgia has to play everybody in the top 4.
Right.
And Texas A&M plays nobody in the top 4.
It's a completely uneven schedule.
Right.
And I mean, it almost embarrassingly so.
In some instances, it is. It is. Yeah. But you do look at them. They do have to play Missouri, but they get Missouri at home. They do have to play LSU, but they get LSU at home. I mean, their toughest conference game, Vince, is either at Auburn or at Florida as far as road game. That's their toughest road game in the league. Yeah. Where Georgia has to play at Texas, at Bama, at Ole Miss. So that factors in as well. I also have a great deal of respect for Mike Elko and think he's going to be a really good hire there.
Well,
and I love the OC he hired. I love Colin Klein as an OC. The thing that could be his undoing, how much control do you want to give Jay Bateman?
yes.
That's the big hesitation I have with A&M. What helps them is that they don't have to. Jay Bateman doesn't have to stop Texas or Georgia, he doesn't have to stop Georgia or Bama or Ole Miss or Tennessee.
Sure,
that's the thing.
Well, I would. You talk about respect for Mike Elko. I would much rather be in Notre Dame's position, getting them week 1, than Texas's position, getting them week 12.
100%. Game 12.
What I mean?
Yes,
game 12. Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
Because I think this team is going to be markedly better.
Yeah.
As the season progresses,
and they have stretches where get right stretches.
Absolutely.
Right? Like I actually have A&M starting 2-2 because I actually have them losing to Florida.
Really?
Which we'll get into. I do at Florida. I do. But then they play Bowling Green, Arkansas on a neutral field, having them winning that. Then they get Missouri at home. That's what I think sparks them.
Okay.
Then they get a bye. So now they're up to 4-2. Then they go to Mississippi State, who is literally has to replace like 11 starters on one side of the ball. Like it's bad. And they only have 2 coming back on the other side of the ball. Like Jeff Lebby's literally starting over from scratch. And then they get LSU at home, and that's upset win number 2. And then, I do have them losing at Auburn, but then they're at South Carolina, bye, New Mexico State at home, and then at Auburn, and then home against Texas. So the schedule sets up real nicely for the Aggies, in my opinion, combined with talented roster and a heck of a head coach.
Sure.
And I think that's going to be the thing that gets them going. So I have them number 6. A couple teams like Oklahoma was a really hard team to evaluate, Vince, because they're a team that I think their roster is better than what their record is going to be. And because they're one of those teams that like Texas got a very, hey, welcome to the SEC. We like you guys, and we're going to give you a nice, easy path to the championship game. With Oklahoma, they were like, your little brother to Texas. We don't care about you. And so we're going to give you Tennessee, at Auburn, Texas on a neutral field, at Ole Miss, at Missouri, at LSU, and home against Bama. Welcome to the SEC. Right? I mean, it's a completely different thing, completely different schedule. They could go 9-3, and that's a great coaching job by Brent Venables. I mean, think about that. Because if they go 9-3 between Tennessee, at Auburn, Texas neutral field, at Ole Miss, at Missouri, home against Bama, at LSU, against that 7-game schedule, which is not easy, they have to go 4-3. Right? I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
Yeah,
pretty good schedule.
Yeah, no. Yes.
So, that's kind of what I look at, Vince, and I say that's what factors. Like Florida, I actually like Florida's team coming back. I do.
Sure.
Like I think they got rid of some attitude guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some bad attitude guys. I think Graham Mertz had a really nice year last year for them. I think they've got a shot to be a pretty good offensive line. They got some weapons on the perimeter. Their defense has a lot coming back. I don't love their D coordinator, but the rest of the defensive staff they got rid of and brought in new guys. Got rid of Jay Bateman. That helps. Right? He was a linebackers coach for them. And, but their schedule is just insane.
That's
I mean, it's like, again, if I'm Billy Napier, I'm like, what did I do to you guys? Like, who did I tick off in the home office that, wants to get me fired? Because Texas this year, they play Miami. This is their fault. They play Miami at home, right? And which I actually think they're going to win that game. They play Texas A&M at home. They play at Tennessee, home against Kentucky. So like you're looking at, you're like, hold on, Miami at home, Samford at home, Texas A&M at home, at Mississippi State, who might be the second worst team in the league, and then home against UCF. That's not a hard schedule, right?
Yeah, but okay. Starting October 12th.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Here's what they have next: at Tennessee, Kentucky at home, Georgia in Jacksonville, at Texas, home against LSU, home against Ole Miss, at Florida State. Like
there's a world where they're 0-7 starting October 12th.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like there is a universe where that's possible.
Going 0-7 from October 12th on?
Yes.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
I was like 0-7. Like they're not going to lose to Samford.
No.
I get you.
Yeah.
That they lose their final 7 games. I don't think they will.
I don't think they will either.
Like I have them beating Kentucky, and I think they'll win and I have them upsetting LSU.
Okay.
So I think they'll win a couple. But the thing is, if they collapse because of that schedule, then I could see them just, to your point, just losing.
Yeah.
The rest of the way. So
Billy Napier won't be around to see all 7 of those games. But yeah.
Right.
All right.
That A&M and Miami games, if he can go 4-1 to start the season and split the Miami A&M games, but be competitive in those 2 games, right? Or in the game you lose, I think he could salvage himself, because if they're 4-1, I think that team will have a lot of confidence.
Okay.
They'll go on the road, lose to Tennessee, but I think it'll be a competitive game, and then come home and beat Kentucky at home. Now you're 5-2, and you say, okay, well, what are we going to do down the stretch? And if they're that team, then I could see them. Okay, they lose to Georgia, but they don't get destroyed. They lose to Texas, but don't get destroyed. They maybe pull off an upset between one of LSU and Ole Miss. They win one of them at home. Then you look at if they can finish, and even if they collapse down the stretch, record-wise, if they play hard and pull off a couple upsets, now you're 7-5-ish, 8-4-ish, and I think that should save his job when you consider what he's gone through.
If he gets fired at 8-4, it's complete BS.
It's because they didn't want him there.
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
Because this team is just screaming 6-6 to me. Like, at best, screaming 6-6. You know what I'm saying? And that would be a successful season because of this schedule. I mean, no favors were given to Florida in the schedule category. And the other team that I think also did not get any love in the schedule category is Kentucky. I feel like their schedule is also in the brutal range because they host Georgia, they go to Ole Miss, they go to Florida, they host Auburn, they go to Tennessee, they go to Texas, and they finish off the season, of course, with Louisville, and it's a home game. But still, Louisville is going to be a good to decent team this year, so that's a tough game to finish your season off with. But again, the SEC did not do them any favors either. No. Any favors.
No. But you look, Kentucky's another team that I look at and say, Vince, I like their roster a lot better than I have them ranked. But again, they play Georgia at home, at Ole Miss, at Florida, at Tennessee, at Texas. Like that's tough. Rough schedule.
Man.
Yeah.
That is because I honestly wanted to try to move Florida and Kentucky up.
But their schedule, their schedule makes it hard.
I looked at their schedule. I was like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
LSU's a very interesting team, Vince, because I feel like the league hates Billy Napier and Sam Pittman. When we say this, we're being sarcastic, right? Like it's just a fun way to talk about the schedule. But I feel like, Brian Kelly, they're like, all right, BK, we got you. We got your back. Right. So you look at LSU's schedule, and they play USC to start the season. They don't play Texas. They don't play Georgia. They get Bama at home. They play Ole Miss at home. They don't get number 5 Tennessee. They do got to play A&M on the road, which will be tough. They don't get Missouri. They get Oklahoma at home, and they don't play Kentucky. Like their road games are at South Carolina, at Arkansas, at Florida, and then at Texas A&M. So I mean, they're not easy, but they're not brutal either. And then, of course, their non-conference, they get USC at home in Las Vegas.
Right. They go on the road like 4.5 times.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have them going 9-3, Vince, this season. But I don't know that they're going to be quite that good because I think their schedule
it'll inflate it.
Yeah. And I think their defense is going to end up being better than it really actually is. But I think to have them beating USC in the opener, have them beating South Carolina at home on the road, obviously beat Nichols, beat UCLA at home, beat South Alabama. So I have them starting 0-5, and then 5-0. Then the next 3 games are going to determine their season, in my opinion.
Sure.
They get Ole Miss at home, at Arkansas, at A&M. All 3 of those teams have played LSU real tough the last couple of years, real tough. And so I'm okay. How are they going to handle those teams this year? That's kind of a question I have. So like last year, for example, I talked about this. LSU almost beat Arkansas, or Arkansas almost beat LSU last year. And remember, we broke this down. I'm going to pull up the box score again, Vince. But they had a lead late in the game last year. Arkansas did. against LSU. So I'm pretty sure. So it was 24-24. LSU went ahead, and then Arkansas tied it up with 5 minutes left, and then LSU kicked the game-winning field goal with 5 seconds left. And the year before, Arkansas almost beat them again at LSU, and that was the game. Remember, they were down to like their third or fourth string quarterback in that game, and still only lost. I think it was like 13-10. If KJ Jefferson plays in that game, LSU gets beat. So they've played them tough. Ole Miss has played them tough. Last year, obviously, they beat Ole Miss, but it was in that 52-55. Oh no, they lost to Ole Miss 55-49 in a shootout last year, and then they blew Ole Miss out the year before. So, that's going to be a challenging game. A&M beat them 2 years ago. So Kelly's first year, A&M was not very good. They beat LSU 38-23 at LSU. And then last year, LSU ended up beating A&M 42-30. But if you remember correctly, A&M was beating them early in that game. Like, they played with them. They just didn't have the horses. They were playing, a bunch of guys were out, and they just ran out of gas late in the game. But A&M was winning that game 17-14. It was 17-14 at halftime. And then in the second half, Vince, they took a 24-14 lead over LSU.
Yeah.
And then Jaden Daniels was like, I'm going to go ahead and real quick wrap up the Heisman in these next 2 quarters. Right? I mean, that's kind of what he did. It's like,
that's funny.
I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this Heisman thing real fast and just knock this one out real fast and put you guys out. But they were down 24-14 in the third quarter. They don't have Superman to save them anymore.
Exactly.
And they don't have Batman and Robin on the outside, AKA, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, and so it's going to be a little bit of a different deal. I do think their defense is going to be better, but it's not going to be as better as people think because the talent is still not great. So I have LSU going 9-3, Vince. So but again, I have them 9-3, but I have them 7th in the league.
Exactly.
And I have them with a better record than A&M overall, but that's because I don't have them losing a non-conference game where I have A&M at 8-4, but one of those 4 losses is to Notre Dame at the beginning of the season. So, and like I said, Kentucky's another one. And Auburn's a wild card for me. They're a big wild card for me because they've got some talent, but they're going to be real young a receiver, and I'm not a Peyton Thorne fan at quarterback. If Peyton Thorne's better than I think he is, or they got somebody else waiting in the wings, Auburn could be a little bit of a surprise and maybe climb up into that top 10, in my opinion, Vince. Because I had him 11. I think you had him 12. Or did
10.
You have 10?
I have 10.
I could see them creeping up.
But...
I mean, it just flipped one spot. I could see Auburn being a bit of a surprise team, and maybe the record doesn't reflect it. Maybe they're 7-5, 8-4, but they're going to pull off an upset.
Yeah,
and they're going to have a lot of chances for
team.
upsets too.
Yeah.
A lot of chances for upsets this year, Vince, because some of their tougher games they get at home, and so I think there's chances for them to pull off. They get Oklahoma at home, and they get Texas A&M at home, but their schedule in the middle is where they have to pull off an upset in the middle, in my opinion, because they start off with Alabama A&M. That's a win. They should beat Cal at home. They should beat New Mexico at home. Should beat Arkansas at home. Then it's okay. You got Oklahoma at home, at Georgia, at Missouri, at Kentucky. If you can go 2-2 in that stretch, Vince, then you got Vandy at home, Louisiana Monroe at home, and then A&M at home before you go play Bama. So if you can go 2-2 during that stretch, you got a shot to be 9-2 going into play Bama at the end of the year at Bama, right? If you can upset A&M at home. So it's going to be a fun league to watch.
Yeah, it will be.
It is, because there's a lot of teams that I could say, man, I like that team, but I could see them plummeting. And I like that team. And if they can catch a couple breaks, I could see that team really rising up. So my 1-16 is not indicative of who the best team is in the league. I think Georgia's the best team in the league. But I just think the schedule is such that it's going to be that way. Now, I have Georgia beating Texas in a rematch in the SEC title game.
As do I.
And being the SEC champs.
Yes, I have the same thing. And my reasoning basically behind it is, look, Texas is going to have obviously a lot of momentum coming out of their season because I do have them winning the SEC. There's no doubt about it. Oh, well, there's no doubt about what I wrote down. And
did you have them going 12-0?
I didn't. I went more like who I think the better teams are. I didn't go through it piece by piece like
Okay.
you did. I'll be honest with you. But I like the way their schedule sets up. And so I felt like they had the advantage over Georgia in that matchup. And so that's why I picked them to win it. Does that make sense? So that's why I have them winning the regular season. And then when it comes to the playoff game, I just feel like I have to give a lot of credit to Georgia because they've been there, done that, and Texas hasn't proven that they can do that. Now, maybe this is the year that they do that, but I feel like in a conference championship game, Georgia's not going to let happen to them what happened last year. That's still going to be very fresh. That's an open wound still for them. They're not going to let that happen again. And I don't care who the opponent is, and in this case, it would be Texas, and they could potentially be the underdog in this game if they lose the regular season matchup. I don't see any way they lose that game. I just don't. And so that's why I have them winning it and getting the automatic or getting the bye and the automatic top 4 seed for sure. Hey, look at that.
Sorry, Rita's trying to yeah. So she wanted to make her appearance. Hang on, baby. Just hang on.
We love special guests.
Yes.
Special guests are a good thing.
That's Rita. She's okay. She's about to start howling here in a second. Vince, I tend to agree with you. I think Texas has some flaws in their team. I just don't know that they're going to get exploited in the regular season. And I think Georgia's going to be super battle tested going into that last game. The other part too is I actually don't think the Longhorns are going to have as much momentum as you do because I actually did the game by game thing. I actually have them losing their last regular season game.
Right.
The other thing is we've seen Georgia in rematches where they got their butts kicked and the rematches didn't turn out well for the opponents. 17, they got their butts kicked by Auburn in the regular season, 41-17. They pounded Auburn in the SEC title game, 28-7. And then in 2021, their first title team, Bama beat them, I think it was like 41-24 in the SEC title game, smacked them. And then Georgia beat them by double digits in the national title game.
Right.
You're not beating Georgia twice.
This is that 100%.
You're not beating them twice.
And then you add, and like I said, you add in the fact that they lost that game last year. Again, they should not have lost. You know what I mean?
Right. They were a more talented team than Bama. But again, Bama was battle tested. Georgia wasn't.
There you go.
That's a big part of it. Georgia just played nobody all year. The exact opposite is going to happen this year.
Right.
So, Georgia could. I have Georgia as a 2-loss team that's going to get a top 4 seed. So next final question before we move on to some of the other particulars, Vince.
Yep.
Who do you have making the college football playoff out of the SEC?
I have, and this is, folks, it's the SEC, right? They're going to get a little bit of love or a lot of bit of love because they're the SEC and because they are. I do think the SEC is going to be better as a whole than it's been. It's
going to be a better league, but the records may not reflect.
But the records may not reflect it, and I think in a year where the records may not reflect it, I think that 4th team is outside looking in. Because you're going to have a lot of comparable records, and I think that 4th team that the SEC wants in so badly is not going to get in this year because of that exact situation. So, if you're going off, if I'm basing it off of my, finished rankings, right? So I've got Texas and Georgia in the SEC title game, both in any given year, both teams that are in the championship game of the SEC are going to get in. And I don't think this is any different. So Texas and Georgia, they're both in. Okay. The third one, go ahead.
You said just because I had to step away and
deal
with Stadium. You said so far Georgia and Texas, you have both in, correct?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I said in any given year, the 2 teams that are in the championship game, I think more often than not are going to get into the playoff in the SEC. Because they're the SEC, you made it to the championship. There's no divisions anymore. You're not going to get a sneaky team that just happened to win their division, get into the championship. It's the 2 best teams. And so they're going to get in almost every single time, unless some wild scenario takes place. And so Texas and Georgia are in. I think I've got Alabama coming in 3rd. I think they're the 3rd team that gets in. I think the 4th team, which I have is Ole Miss, I think they're on the outside looking in because I think some schedule comparisons are going to hurt them. And the 4th team, whoever it happens to be, and I have it as Ole Miss, I think they're on the outside looking in.
All right. So first of all, I want to say something. We had somebody in the chat that did remind me of something about the rematch in the title game with Bama and Georgia that I have said in the past. I think that game looks a lot different if Jameson Williams doesn't get knocked out early in the game.
No,
John Mechie got hurt in the SEC title game, so he was already out. And then Jameson Williams caught a long pass and got knocked out. Yeah. So that game might have gone different. But that's Bama. Texas isn't Bama.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Even this version isn't. Yeah.
Right. Right. So that is a fair point. A very fair point about.
I remember that. Weren't we watching that game in the bar down in Arizona?
No, that was the Cincinnati game. Okay. That was the Alabama-Cincinnati game at the because that was a bowl game. Remember, because we were down there for the Fiesta Bowl.
Okay.
But you and I watched that game together at my house.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was.
That's where
I knew you were close. Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
I knew I was with you. We watched it at my house.
Okay.
So that Texas, Georgia, Bama, I have all three of those. Bama's the wild card for me in the SEC because I can see them being in the title game. I don't think Bama's going to take the drop off that a lot of people think they're going to take. And I mean, I even read the preseason mail. They lost 40 players, and like some of those guys left because they didn't play. Like they act like they lost a bunch of dudes.
Right.
That man, they lost all these guys, and I don't know how they're going to replace all these guys. And
sure,
and it's like, okay, yeah, they lost dudes, but some of those dudes weren't playing. And it's also like, let's not act like they didn't land a bunch of guys either out of the portal. I mean, they got a bunch of like leftovers from Washington, that leftovers meaning guys that didn't leave for the NFL, transferred to Alabama. I mean, so they got a couple offensive linemen. Caden Proctor came back, which he left. They got Keon Sabb, who was a starter for Michigan's national title team. They got Parker Brailsford, who started at center for Washington in the last year. They got Jeremy Bernard, who was a rotation receiver for them last year. They got Damani Jackson, who was a starter last year for USC at corner. They got LT Overton, who was a highly ranked, talented defensive lineman who transferred in. I mean, so they got some dudes now. I mean, they didn't just go out there and like, oh, I guess we lost a bunch of dudes. And so I do have some questions about Bama at receiver. How quickly can Ryan Williams grow up? I think their other returning receivers are good players. They're not great players. Ryan Williams could be a great player. They're going to have him grow up in a hurry. I think they're going to be very good. Here's the thing is, can Kalen DeBoer win with a team that's better running the football? As good as Kalen DeBoer is as a coach, and I think he's fantastic. You know this, Vince. There's not many there are not many coaches or analysts that are as high on Kalen DeBoer as I am, and that's partly why I had them in the playoff last year. Remember, I predicted him to be in the playoff last year. I think he's a phenomenal coach. What I don't know about him is, can he win at this level with a running football team? Because I think if you look at the makeup of this team, they can't win the same way that Washington won. They can't win asking Jalen Milroe to be Michael Penix. They're different players.
Right.
Can he be can he run a more balanced offense? If he can, then I think Bama is going to be dangerous, because their offensive line's not very athletic outside of the center, but it's huge. And I love their running backs. Justice Haynes has got a chance to be a really good player. Richard Young, some other guys that they have coming back. They're going to have a really good backfield. And of course, Jalen Milroe is a dynamic runner. And now the receivers don't have to be the dudes that they were before, right? And yeah, Ryan Williams is an elite player, but Ryan Williams is 5'11", $190. Julio Jones was 6'4", 200 plus. It's a different type of freshman player. So you don't want to have to ask him to be the guy right away.
Sure.
Got to run the football. If he can make that adjustment, then I would actually strongly consider having Bama in the title game again. But I just need to see it. As great as a coach I think he is, I just don't know that he can win that way. You know what I mean? And so we'll see. But I think Bama I have in the playoff. I think they're a dangerous team. I have Ole Miss in the playoff. I think Ole Miss is going to go 10-2. And the thing about Ole Miss going 10-2, Vince, is if they're 10-2, they're going to have a couple tough losses, but they're also going to have some really big wins. Because Ole Miss is a team that, to me, their schedule is going to allow them to get in at 10-2. Their non-conference is a joke. They play Furman, Middle Tennessee, Georgia Southern, and at Wake. But their regular season schedule, they play Georgia, Oklahoma, LSU, Kentucky, Florida, Arkansas. That to me is I have it as a 2-loss schedule between Florida on the road, Georgia at home, Arkansas on the road, Oklahoma at home, LSU on the road. I do have them as having 2 losses. But I think that's going to be a 2-loss team that gets them in the playoff. And especially since I only have 3 Big Ten teams in the playoff. Remember that. Did I only have 2? I think I might only had 2 Big Ten teams in the playoff. I think part of that's going to be because the SEC gets 4.
Yeah, I get that. So combined with the 2 big conferences, you've got 6.
Because I think you're only going to get 2 out of the ACC. So you're going to have the Big 12 champ, the SEC champ, the Big 10 champ, the Big 12 champ, and the Group of 5 champ, and then Notre Dame, right?
That's 6.
And I think a second Big 10 team gets in, and then I think 3 SEC team gets in, and I think a second ACC team gets in. Now it comes down to, does that 12 go to a third Big 10 or a second Big 12? That's going to be the question mark. And so so I see 4 SEC teams, and I could even see a 5th SEC team getting in. I could. I don't think it's going to happen this year because I think they're going to kind of beat each other up. But I could see a Tennessee or an LSU, if LSU can pull off an upset during the season, I could see that team sneaking in as the 5th in that league if the Big Ten beats itself up in a similar fashion that I think the SEC will do. I just think the SEC teams at the top, a couple of them got schedules like Ole Miss's schedule is challenging, but like they didn't get like a Georgia schedule. You know what I mean? And I think Bama's schedule is a lot harder than Ole Miss's too. So I think 10-2 with Ole Miss, because they are considered going into the season a top team, that they'll get the benefit of the doubt to me. So that's where I'm at with the SEC, the top 4 in the SEC.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next part of our little SEC discussion here. And let's talk. Well, we talked about our league champion and who we think is going to win that, who makes the college football playoff. Good there. Biggest surprises from the rankings, teams that interest us. I think we kind of hit that already. So I want to hear your overrated. Who do you think is overrated by media, by fans, however you want to take it? Who is your overrated team for this season?
The big one for me is Missouri. And I understand why Missouri's overrated. They have some very talented players coming back. They have one of the best receiving. I expect them to have one of the best receiving cores in the country this year. Like, I think the receiving core is going to be outstanding.
Sure.
And Brady Cook's a good player. I think he's a little overhyped. They did lose a really good running back. Their offensive line lost some guys. Their defense lost some guys. And I just don't think they're in a position to reload the way that people think they are. And their schedule's not easy. So I think Missouri takes a dip back. A lot of people have them as a borderline playoff team. I have them as the number 8, maybe even the 9 in the league. So I think Missouri for me is a team that I think is that's the one overrated team I have in the league. I have LSU lower than most in the media do. I believe most have them like 5th or 6th. I don't have them as high, but I just think that's because of the way the schedule shape up. I'm fine with LSU where they are. I'm good with Tennessee. I think Ole Miss is a little overrated coming in the season as well. People have them as like a top 5 to 8 team. I have them more 15 to 20, like right now, and they got to prove me a little bit. But, then, of course, I have them proving myself and then getting in and back in the end in the top 12. So It's like when you talk about overrated, I don't think they should be top 5. I think they should be more top 15 right now with a chance to jump in. And I think based on their schedule, they're going to jump there.
I think that's fair.
But I mean, that's a semantic overrated. It's not like they have them top 5. Like, remember that a couple years ago when A&M was in the top 5 and I just crushed everyone that had them top 5. I was like, I don't even know if they're going to finish ranked. And we were right. And there's that same year where like North Carolina was a top 10. Like, they're not going to finish close in the top 10. That's not what I'm saying about Ole Miss. And I'm not even saying that about Missouri per se, but I do think they're a little overrated. I will say that.
I also had Missouri for a lot of the same reasons that you did. And one of the main reasons for me, and we talked about this a little bit pregame, is that I feel like Missouri is going to take a step back based on who they were last year. I do feel that way. And I wanted to push them back a little bit further in my rankings. I have them sitting at 5, but it's almost totally schedule driven. Like, their schedule is very kind when it comes to the SEC, in my opinion. Now, there's winnable games in there. I think they can outscore a couple of teams here and there as well. And I wanted to drop them to about 8 or 9 in that neighborhood, kind of where you have them already. But then I look at the schedule and it's like, well,
I get that.
I think they're going to win some games that maybe if they were playing a different schedule, they wouldn't win those games. And so based on their schedule and based on where I think their final win-loss record is going to be, that's why I have them at 5. Now, I think they're definitely on the outside looking into the playoff and all of those things, but I have them at 5 because I think they're going to win more games than some other teams because their schedule sets up more nicely for them. And yeah, and so I think they are overrated. Now I think they're going to end up, like I said, with a good win-loss record. And so does that mean that they ended up being overrated? Depends on how you look at it. I just don't. I think talent-wise, I think they're a little overrated from what I'm hearing because they made the run that they did last year.
Right.
People,
which is also schedule-driven, in my opinion.
It was. And
the other thing that in their defense, another reason I think that they're getting a little bit of hype is they battled Georgia each of the last 2 years.
Sure.
Like they played Georgia tough. They were one of the few SEC teams that actually gave Georgia a tough game in the regular season in the last couple of years. Almost beat them 2 years ago. Yeah. Remember that at Missouri? Almost beat them. So I'll give them a little bit of credit there.
Sure.
I will.
Let's talk underrated. So some underrated teams flying under the radar that might be able to make some noise. Who you got? I got 2.
Okay. Let me hear yours.
So we kind of talked about this already, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I was looking for a way to move Kentucky and Florida up. I feel like they've got good rosters. I feel like they may win some games. Maybe they're not supposed to win. I mean, you had mentioned that Florida, if they're 8-4, man, that is like the best coaching job that Florida could possibly do.
Sure.
And I think they would be extremely ecstatic about that, or they should be. Okay. So I was looking for a way to move them up the standings, and I couldn't because of their schedule. I just couldn't do it. And Kentucky falls in that same category for me. I think there's some winnable games on their schedule where they might be able to jump up and bite one of these teams and maybe ruin their season, kind of the deal. I think they can play spoiler. They're going to lose more of those games than they're going to win, which is why they are 11th in my rankings. But I feel like don't look past Kentucky. I'll say it that way. Don't look past Kentucky because I think they can get a couple wins maybe that they're not supposed to.
It's the SEC. No one's overrated. No one's underrated. Excuse me.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as an underrated SEC team.
That's a good point.
If I had to pick one,
for
the spirit of discussion, if I had to say someone's underrated,
right,
I'd say Kentucky. That'd be mine. Because I'm looking at Athlon, they have Kentucky 12th.
Yeah.
If they had a more solidified quarterback situation, I would have Kentucky 7th or 8th. Yeah. I love their defense coming back. I think their run game's going to be pretty good. Getting Liam Cohen back should help a little bit at OC. Got a good running back room. They got a talented group of receivers. I really like this Kentucky team. I just don't know if they're going to be – Mark Stoops tends to be a little conservative, right? That always concerns me. And I don't know how Brock Vandegrift's going to be at quarterback.
Sure.
He never really played at Georgia. He's talented. He was a highly ranked kid. I thought he was overrated coming out. He's still a good player. I just thought he was overrated. Some people had him a 5-star for a while. How does he handle stepping in the lineup? That's right. How does he handle Liam Cohen's offense? That's my major question mark.
Sure.
For them. If he plays well, then this Kentucky team is exactly what you said, Vince. You do not want to get Kentucky in a situation for you that's must win. You're not going to want that. Right. So if I had to pick an underrated team in the SEC, I'd go Kentucky. But again, nobody in the SEC is underrated. They're all overrated, if anything. So that's my SEC rant for the day. Just having a little bit of fun there because I did say that I think this is going to be a great year. Right. I think it's a very deep year. I mean, look, I got Kentucky 10th in the SEC. They're probably in the top 5 in the ACC this year.
Yeah,
top 5 Big 12 team this year, if we're being honest. So it as I said earlier, this year the SEC is what everybody assumes they are every year. They're a loaded team.
Coaches on the hot seat. And this is a very interesting topic because I think there's a handful of coaches on the hot seat in the SEC. And a lot of it is schedule driven. A lot of it is based on what they've done in the past. I've got 3 on my list, and they're probably, I would assume they're similar to the ones that you've got on your list, but I've got 3 guys that should be concerned based on what the scuttlebutt is going into the season, and then based on the schedules that they received going into this season as well. So
you have how many? 2?
I have 3.
Okay, I have 3 as well. I wonder if I have 3 that are on the hot seat now and 2 that could get on the hot seat depending on how the season goes.
Okay, cool.
So, okay, let's go. Who's your 3?
So I've got Sam Pittman from Arkansas on the hot seat. I've got Clark Lee from Vanderbilt.
Okay, we don't have the same top 3.
Okay.
Interesting.
And I've got Billy Napier from Florida on the hot seat.
Okay.
Obviously, Billy Napier's gotten the most press
Sure.
about being on the hot seat than anybody. I mean, they've already picked his replacement. You know, I mean,
they have.
Well, I mean, I'm hearing
gotcha.
Lane Kiffin. You know what I mean? Like
the media's picked
the
his
media.
replacement. Got it.
That's what I'm talking about. So those are the 3 that I have on the hot seat. Who obviously you've got a different one. So what do you got?
Well, I have Sam Pittman.
Okay.
Who, from everything I've ever heard, is one of the most likable coaches in the business. It's just he's not getting it done right now. And hopefully, and the league didn't do him any favors with the schedule. I mean, he's already on the hot seat going in. And the league you're talking, let's just go through their schedule. We didn't break it down earlier. They've got to play at Oklahoma State, non-conference, at Auburn, A&M on a neutral field. They get Tennessee at home, LSU at home. They get Mississippi State at home. No, I'm sorry, on the road. They get Ole Miss at home. They get Texas at home. And they got to play at Missouri. And I've always said, Vince, I want to play the teams I know I can beat at home and the teams I know I can't beat on the road.
Yeah. 100%.
I would have much rather had Auburn at home and Texas on the road or Ole Miss on the road than the other way around. So
right.
I actually think they're going to have a couple big wins. I do. I just think the schedule's too hard. I don't love their quarterback situation. He just hasn't been able to figure it out, unfortunately. And he's had a lot of chances to win some really tough games, and they just can't pull it. He's got a chance to be 2-0 against Brian Kelly, and his team couldn't finish the deal. Right? Can he figure that out this year with Bobby Petrino now as the OC? Or here's the way it's going to go one of 2 ways at A&M or at Arkansas. One, Bobby Petrino comes in and is bought into being the OC and not trying to undermine Sam Pittman, and he gets the offense going because he is a great offensive mind. Not the greatest human being on the planet, but great offensive mind. They get going. They pull off some upsets. Sam Pittman saves his job. That's an option. Well, there's really 3 ways it could go. And that's where they could be. That's their best version of Arkansas. That's a potential 8-win team. Then there's the Arkansas that wins just enough that Bobby Petrino does his thing. He's undermining Sam Pittman behind the scenes the entire time. They win 6 or 7 games, which is just enough to get Sam Pittman fired and Bobby Petrino hired. And then the third one is they just are terrible. And Bobby Petrino is a cancer, and he's undermining Sam Pittman. That undermines the entire offense and undermines the team, which lost a ton off the defense, and they just collapse, and they all get fired. Right? Those are the 3 options. And I understand why he did what he did. But I just think bringing Bobby Petrino, the former head coach at Arkansas, who went to a Sugar Bowl, right? That's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a major tough one. So I assume you have Billy Napier on there. We just get our
yes, Sam Pittman, Billy Napier. My third one is Shane Beamer.
Okay,
I think Shane Beamer's in the hot seat. I do.
Okay.
And I know not everyone's going to agree with this, but I think
he's 5-7 last year, which obviously is unacceptable. I get that.
And they haven't quite taken advantage of the portal the way they had. And I just think he kind of rubs people the wrong way.
I could see that.
He's been there 4 years.
I like, but yeah, I can see that.
I don't. Okay. I love his dad. I love confidence, but he just kind of comes across as like a whiner.
Yeah, I get that.
Just I watch him on the sidelines and I'm like, dude, you're acting like a basketball coach. Right? Like, how basketball coaches are always lobbying for things. Like, and there's football coaches do that too, but in a different way. He kind of annoyed me a little bit in the Notre Dame game a couple years ago. And, he didn't build on last year's success. And I don't know that he's getting the full support that he needs. They're coming off of a 5-7 year. I'm not saying he should be on the hot seat, but I think that he is. And when you look at their team and you look at the schedule they got, again, it's as another team that didn't get any favors done to them by the powers that be in the league.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, second game of the year, they got to go play Kentucky. This is their first 3 games. Old Dominion home should be a win. Then they got to go to Kentucky in week 2, and then they come home a week later, and they get LSU. Then they get Akron at home, bye week, and then here's their next 4 games: Ole Miss at home, at Bama, at Oklahoma, A&M at home. They also get Missouri at home, and then they got to play at Clemson to end the season. And I think that's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's going to be a tough one.
So you have 2 guys that could eventually end up on the hot seat, depending on how the season goes. So who do you got there?
Unfortunately, I have Clark Lee on that next list.
Okay.
I don't think that he's on it now, but again, I think he could end up being on it. And it's not his fault.
It's so
the NIL era is killing Vanderbilt because Vanderbilt's not competing in it at all.
No. Yeah.
Their roster gets they bring these kids in, develop them, and then they leave to go to other higher ranked teams. And this is exactly what we said was going to happen to teams like Vanderbilt. Every good player they have just about leaves to go somewhere else. Like one of their D linemen went to USC. Their 2 top receivers left. One went to Georgia. Yep. It's not his fault, but that's just what happens.
Yeah.
You know, they've had their starting quarterback, I think, each of the last 2 years transfer, and it's a tough spot, man. It really is, and I don't think it's his fault. But and then you look at their schedule and you say, okay, are they going to be any good? I don't think they're going to be that good. Their non-conference isn't great. You know, they got to play Virginia Tech at home. If they can win that game, that might be the thing that salvages it. But if they lose that game, it's not a given they're going to beat Georgia State 2 weeks later. Yeah. And this is their conference schedule, Vince. At Missouri,
so hard.
Home against Bama, at Kentucky, home against Texas, at Auburn, home against South Carolina, at LSU, home against Tennessee.
Like, what in the world? Like, come on, man. That's why I put him on the hot seat to begin with, because he's got I think he's got 3 SEC wins in his career down there total, and then you hand him this schedule.
Right?
Like, really?
And I don't like it because Clark Lee's one of the good guys in the business.
Yeah, 100%.
And I hope that him being an alum, he's one of those ones that I hope they start evaluating him on things not related to winning football games.
I know.
Hey, kids are graduating. No one's getting in trouble. You're running a clean program. Yeah. We're not competing in the NIL landscape. So we're gonna.
You're not setting him up for success
don't get embarrassed. That'd be my thing. Don't have bad losses like last year. This is why Clark Lee's on the hot seat. It's not because they lost by double digits to every conference opponent. Literally, they lost by 17 to Kentucky because they had a tough schedule last year too. Not only that they play all the teams in the East, but their crossover games were Ole Miss and Auburn.
Thank you very much.
You know, and they lost every game by at least, I think their closest game was 16 points at home to Auburn. That's not why he's on the hot seat. It's because they also lost at Wake Forest by 16, and they got beat by UNLV. You can't lose games like that.
But that's a fair evaluation, though.
Right.
You can't lose to UNLV. I mean,
you go 0-8 in the league against that schedule. Like, dude, I get it. Literally every team had a significantly better roster than you, and we're not competing in a way that allows you to have a better roster.
Correct.
But you can't lose to Georgia State this year. You have to try your best to upset Virginia Tech. I mean, those are the games that you just can't afford to lose, in my opinion, Vince. And that's the kind of game he lost last year, and that's the problem.
Right. For sure. That makes sense. I mean, I get that. That makes sense. So we just have him in a different spot of hot seat.
Yeah.
And again,
we're coming at it from the same. I don't know that he's on it now. I think it could happen very quickly. And then my last guy that's not on the hot seat now, but could be, is Brent Venables.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I don't know that it's necessarily fair that he would then get put on the hot seat. But as I said before, Vince, when we look at the SEC, I actually think Oklahoma has a pretty decent team coming back. I really like their defense. Like, I think the Oklahoma defense has a chance to be really good this year. But I've got major question marks about their offense. Their offensive line literally lost every single starter. They've got some talented receivers coming back and coming in. And they've got Jackson Arnold taking over quarterback, who I like, but I don't love. I think he was a top 100 guy coming out of high school. Never thought he was the 5-star. They've got Gavin Sawchuk at running back, who's an explosive player. But, man, 5 new starters on the offensive line combined with this schedule. Tennessee, at Auburn, Texas and Dallas, South Carolina, at Ole Miss, at Missouri, home against Bama, at LSU. he could do a great coaching job and go 8-4. If they're worse than 8-4, if they're 7-5, or even worst case scenario 6-6, I think he's on the hot seat, because you can't be the head coach at Oklahoma and have and I don't care what the circumstances are, whatever excuses are, you cannot be the head coach at Oklahoma and have 2 500 seasons in your first 3 years. You just can't. They went 6-7 in this first year, went 6-6 in the regular season. They did bounce back nicely last year, went 10-2, and I think that win over Texas salvaged his reputation a big way, because they started 5-0, but nobody cared. They beat Arkansas State, they beat SMU, they beat Tulsa, they beat a bad Cincinnati team, they beat Iowa State. You beat Texas, that was a big win. Yeah, and they had a really nice win the next week against UCF. It's not real nice win, real ugly win the next week against UCF in a game they should have lost. They got a couple breaks. Then they go on the road and beat Kansas, or lose to Kansas, and then they go on the road and lose to Oklahoma State. They pound West Virginia. They beat TCU convincingly, and then beat BYU on the road. So it's looking good, right? 10-2. Right. And then they go out and lose by 2 touchdowns to Arizona in a bowl game. And that's not gonna help you very much. So, like, they grew last year. Oklahoma was better last year, because if you remember the year before, Vince, they had some. Not only did they lose some games, but they had some games they got curb stomped. Right. I mean, TCU beat them 55-24. Texas beat them 49-0. Right. And some of their close losses were to not very good teams. They lost by 3 at home to Baylor. They lost by 3 to a West Virginia team that wasn't very good. They lost by on the road in overtime to Texas Tech. Right. So they battled last year. They got better, but then they lose their entire offensive line. They've got like 3 or 4 starters coming back on offense. Their defense is going to have to carry them, but that's one heck of a schedule they're going to have to carry them against. And that's a little bit of my concern for them. But if he can win 8+ games, like if he wins 8+ games, and it means they're going to have at least one big win, then okay, there's some buzz, but he's not on the hot seat. Yeah. If they go worse than that, then he's on the hot seat. And in 2025 if you don't get it turned around now.
Okay. So you're putting him on the hot seat as in he could be on the real hot seat going into 25. You're not saying his job is in jeopardy now.
It could, if they totally collapse.
Okay.
Then it could be.
Because going into a new conference and navigating.
Yeah, but you're Oklahoma, right? I mean, that's.
I'm saying, is he going to get any?
But again,
for that?
Who determines the hot seat? It's not you and I having rational conversations. It's boosters.
Fair enough.
Boosters don't anticipate Oklahoma having to. Like, okay, Brian Kelly survived the 4-8 year in 2016, but if he goes 7-5 in 2020 in 2019 or 2018, he's gone.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you can't have 2 of those years at a place like Oklahoma.
That's fair.
And his first year, like, okay, the roster got revamped and all that kind of stuff, because now last year's 10-3 is the anomaly.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Like, that's the thing that you don't know. Like, okay, they were 10-2, 1 year, 6-6, another year. Okay, which one is it? They don't have Jeff Lebby, who left to become the head coach of Mississippi State. He hired Seth Luttrell as his new OC. How's that going to go? I don't know. We'll see. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of questions I have about Oklahoma. And there's some talent. They lost some really good players. Like I said, their entire offensive line's gone. They had a really highly ranked kid that played for them last year. Forget his first name. His last name is Green, who took a payout to go to Missouri. That hurt them as well. And so they're in a tough spot, Vince, because your schedule is challenging to where, I mean, look, Houston at home is not going to be a slouch either, in my opinion. The big key for them is if he can start off 5-0, he'll be fine. And that's going to require them to beat Tennessee at home and Auburn on the road. I don't know that they can win either of those games. Or let me rephrase. I don't know that they're going to win both of those games. I think they can win either of those games, but they could also lose both of those games.
Sure.
But they've got to be no worse than 4-1, because when you come out of that break, your 2 of your next 3 games are going to be brutal. Texas and Dallas, and then 2 weeks later you're at Ole Miss. Then you get a game against Maine in between there, and then the next week you're at Missouri. I mean, their last 3 games are at Missouri, Bama at home, at LSU. If you're 3-2 to start the season, or even 4-2 against, let's say between Tennessee, at Auburn, and Texas, they lose 2 of those games. If you're 4-2 there, you're losing at Ole Miss, you're losing at LSU, you're losing at home at Alabama. Now all of a sudden you're 7-5. and we haven't even talked about their game at Missouri.
Right.
So that 2-game stretch against Tennessee and at Auburn is going to be huge for them, right? Huge for them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the flip side. All the games I just talked about, they can win, right? Like, this isn't like they got no shot against this team. But it's asking a lot of a team with a brand new starting offense and a brand new starting offensive line to beat Tennessee at Auburn, Texas, at Ole Miss, at Missouri, at LSU, and bam, at home. So I just don't think they're going to be able to do it. So right now I have him at 7-5. That's going to get him on the hot seat for next year. If he's worse than that, then there's going to be some rumblings about, do we make that move now? Here's something that's going to factor into that, Vince. Are there any hot names that emerge that they feel they have to make a move on now? Because that's the other thing. If you got a smart AD, and I think Oklahoma has a relatively smart AD.
That's a good point.
Right? He's going to say, look, we're not going to fire Brent Venables because there's nothing out there. Right? But if, let's say there's
one that's good enough to make a splash,
right,
to warrant getting rid of him.
Right.
Yeah.
But let's say some coach is emerging and he's like, this is the new hot name. Kind of like, remember how Brian Kelly was at Cincinnati?
Mm-hmm.
Like, dude, if you don't make a move now, you're not going to have a chance to get him. Urban Meyer at Utah. Or like, dude, You got to make that move now to go out and get that coach. And if there's that guy out there, then he could be in trouble. If there's not that guy out there, you got to be smart enough to say, we're just going to keep rolling and we're going to do what we can, because he's shown he can recruit. That's the thing about Brent Venables that should help him, is he's shown he can recruit. And if things are kind of, I'm not quite sure, then okay, let's go out there and, hey, he's shown he can recruit. He had a tough year, super brutal schedule. The other part too, Vince, is then you look to their 25 schedule. They get Michigan at home. They play Texas on a neutral field. They play at Alabama, at Tennessee, and then their home games in 2025 are Auburn, LSU, Ole Miss, and Missouri.
So you're saying it doesn't get any easier.
Does not get any easier, brother. Does not get any easier. And somebody in the chat, 5 Adams, said that he likes the Kansas head coach like Lance Leopold. I think he's a phenomenal coach. I think Chris Kleiman at Kansas. But are those guys the sexy hires? Lance Leopold's been around for a while.
Yeah.
Like, he's an older guy. I don't know that that's the kind of hire that you would see made. Now, I'm not saying it shouldn't be made. I think more teams should look at guys like that. Sure. But Lance Leopold is 60. You may not think he's that old because he's only been at the Power 5 between 2021, but he was the head coach at Wisconsin Whitewater going all the way back to 2007, right? And he won all those championships at Wisconsin Whitewater, won 6 national championships in 8 years at Wisconsin Whitewater. So he's been around for a while, and then he spent 6 years at Buffalo as the head coach. Guy had the 10-win season at Buffalo, dude. Like, what's his resume like? He won 10 games at Buffalo. Oh, okay, cool.
And then
we're good.
You stop talking because it's like you want to talk about an outlier of a conference, right? A conference member. Buffalo in the MAC makes about as much sense as USC to the Big Ten. To be perfectly honest with you, I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. Right. So, but anyway, that's a different conversation for a different time. My point is, I just don't know if that's the kind of guy that you're going to see Oklahoma say, we got to fire Brent Venables for that guy. To get him.
Here's the other thing, too, is Brent Venables kind of a weird guy. And it's like with a lot of things.
So
when you're weird and you win, he's quirky.
He's quirky. Yeah.
When you're weird and you lose, he's just freaking weird.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's
you're not wrong.
There's no other way to put it, right? It's like, oh, he's interesting. He's unique. He's different when you're winning. When you lose, it's like, like when you're an a-hole as a coach and you win, oh, he's just intense. He's just fire.
Tough.
When you're an a-hole and you lose, you're an a-hole.
Yes.
And they don't want you around anymore. That's just the reality of it. So that's the other thing, too, is he can't afford to not. Like, Marcus Freeman's going to get away with a down season in a way that Brent Venables won't because of how Marcus Freeman is viewed as a representative of the institution.
Sure.
And I don't know that Brent Venables is going to get away with it that way. Somebody asked a question, will Brian Kelly get fired if he loses 6 or 7 games? Yes.
I mean, even with like a massive buyout that I'm sure he's gotten that ridiculous contract that he's got.
I mean, he does have, it'd be like $70 million. I got to think so. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know enough about LSU.
LSU people have said there's no way he gets fired after this year.
Okay.
But I just say, let's see what happens if you go 5-7. Because here's the thing about LSU's schedule. 5-7 means there's some really bad losses on there.
There's some stinkers in there, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, because
they don't have the schedule like some.
If you lose every game that you consider competitive, USC, Ole Miss, Bama, Oklahoma. Okay. All right, cool. That's not great. You lost 3 of them at home. People aren't going to be happy. But then to get to 7, you'd have to lose 3 of at Arkansas, at A&M, at Florida, Vandy at home, UCLA at home, and at South Carolina. You have to lose 3 of those games.
Right.
That's a lot of – you're at LSU. You don't lose those kind of games.
Right.
But that's the thing. The buyout does make a lot of this stuff very interesting. Very interesting.
Look, that's an immovable signpost for a lot of institutions, and I don't know. I don't know what the booster situation is at LSU. I know there's a lot of money flying around, but are they willing? Are they willing to do the Texas A&M Jimbo buyout situation? That's a different conversation. So, last piece of prediction news for our conference chat. Who do you think the MVP is going to be?
I'm going Quinn Ewers.
Oh, come on!
Did you really? I have him as the best team in the regular season.
Yeah.
I think he's going to have a really good year. I think the system is going to let him put up a lot of good numbers.
Yep.
So I think he's going to be the best guy in the league. I think people talk about Carson Beck and all that, and I understand all that, but I just don't think Carson Beck's as good as Quinn Ewers. I think Carson Beck has been in a better situation. I also have a feeling that the further they get away from Todd Monken, the less effective the offense becomes. We've seen that in the past as well. This, Vince, I said Quinn Ewers went from being one of the most overrated prospects I've ever seen to now he's being underrated by some people. A lot of people.
Completely agree.
And so what goes into MVP? Your team's got to be really good. Check. Yep. You got to put up big time numbers. Check. The big key for him is he's going to have to stay healthy, and he hasn't been able to stay healthy. He's missed games each of the last 2 years. So that could be the cat. If he misses a couple games, unless he puts up like Michael Penix numbers in the games he plays, then I don't see him doing that. But last year, Vince, I mean, he missed 2 games and still threw for 3,479 yards. And, he's going to have to up the touchdowns. He only threw 22 last year, 6 picks. But he's a guy that ran for 5 touchdowns. So he's going to have to up the touchdown numbers. But he's going to be close. If he's healthy, he's going to be close to 4,000 yards passing this year.
Yeah.
He'll have some big – if they're as good as we think they're going to be, and we both have them 11-1 or 12-0, it means he's going to have beaten Michigan on the road. Means he will have beaten Georgia.
Yep.
I mean, the big
Oklahoma.
Right. So he'll have some big wins under his belt. So
Yep.
That's why I have him there. I think that's a fair way of putting it. I think when you consider the big wins he's going to have, and look, I'll say this though, if Georgia's 11-1 or better, it's going to be hard for someone from their team not to get it.
I get that.
But I think I have them with 2 losses, and so when I look at their schedule. Like again, if the season plays out the way that I have it, which is them losing the last game of the year at A&M, they will have a road win over Michigan, a neutral field win over Oklahoma, a home field win over Georgia. That's pretty good.
Yep.
That's pretty good. That'll be a lot of MVP building type of games.
I want you to, I know this is a video and an audio podcast, but I want you to read. Can you see that right there? The MVP.
Yeah, Quinn Ewers. There you go.
Yeah, that's how I was like, come on. I thought I was going off the beaten path. I thought I was going to have somebody you didn't have.
I can't believe that the team you had number 1 can't get the MVP from there. Yeah.
It still has to be realistic, obviously. Sure. But, I don't think he's getting the kind of love that, like, if you polled a bunch of people who the MVP of the SEC was going to be, I don't think Quinn Ewers gets a ton of votes. Just don't think he would outside of Texas. You know what I mean? And so I was like, maybe I'll have something he doesn't have. Nope.
No, come on, brother. Come on, brother.
I know. All right. Well, for all the same reasons that you picked him, I picked him. And so there's no sense in rehashing that. But that is our SEC preview.
Hey, real quick, do you have any dark horse potential? Like we've talked about this in the past, like a maybe potential sleeper type of team guy that could do it. I got one.
The wide receiver from Missouri, I think, could have a shot at it.
Luther Burden.
If he has good numbers,
they'd have to finish in the top 3 or 4 in the league.
It's a dark horse. I mean, for sure, but he's a kid that sticks out to me.
I got a dark horse.
Okay.
If Bama's the team that I think they're going to be, I could see 1 or 2 players from Bama winning it. Jalen Milroe's the obvious one.
Sure.
My sleeper one is Justice Haynes, the running back from Bama. I think if Bama, if he can figure out a way to say we're going to be a power running team until we can get the roster the way that we want to get it, I could see Justice Haynes running for 1,300 plus yards. He looked really good coming off the bench last year.
Yeah.
Like really good. And that offensive line is going to be freaking huge.
Yeah.
So I could see that. He's my dark horse.
I get that.
That's my dark horse.
Okay.
I could see that.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Now
that is going to do it for our SEC preview and everything that we think is going to happen in the SEC. So make sure you take it and run to all of your betting places and put all your money and your mortgage money down, because clearly we're not going to be wrong. He says very sarcastically, don't actually do that. Please don't do that.
Yes. God, Vince, are you trying to get me like sued?
I just want to don't actually do that. But no, I always look forward to these chats because these are fun. And so we have done 3 of the Power 4 conferences. Big 12 will be next Thursday. So make sure you stay tuned for that. So we can, and then we'll round out our Power 4 conference predictions. And then we're going to be staring right in the face opening of camp.
Well, we're going to be doing college football playoff predictions.
All
we're
kinds of fun stuff.
And then we're eventually going to get to our season predictions for Notre Dame.
Yep.
It's going right around the corner, dude. Right around the corner.
Absolutely. So in the meantime, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate you guys hanging out with us for as long as you did. Make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends. Jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. You will not regret it. That's all I'm going to say. You won't regret it. So IB Nation Sports Talk tonight at 6, tonight at 5. And then tomorrow is, I believe it's going to be a mailbag tomorrow, correct?
Yep. Ryan and I.
Okay.
Yep.
So Ryan and Bryan.
Last show with Ryan.
Yeah, that's kind of sad, actually.
Well, last show of him being officially employed. He's still going to be on shows. I shouldn't say that because he's going to be doing post games. But like last official.
Right.
Like as an employee of Irish Breakdown show with Ryan tomorrow.
So make sure you guys check it out because, it's going to be the last one as an official employee of Irish Breakdown. So Friday Free for All mailbag tomorrow at 1 o'clock. So make sure you tune in for that. So without further ado, for Bryan, I'm Vince. We will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast.
Thanks, everybody.